This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of what if Naruto abandoned Konoha and created his own village. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time, let's start the story.
He was standing on the village wall. He gazed at the wasteland in front of him. There is a slight wind blowing occasionally. On his left shoulder sat a bird, but it was no ordinary bird. Its feathers were constantly changing color, going from red to orange to yellow and back to red. It was the great bird of fire, the phoenix. Its eyes were also fixed on the seemingly limitless desert in front of it. A serpent, but not just any serpent, coiled itself around the man's right arm. With its head above the man's right shoulder, it was a dragon. Lighting flickered in the dragon's eyes, but despite its immense power, the dragon remained serene. Another bird rested in the man's arm. This bird was a peacock, and like the phoenix, its feathers were always changing color, but not just the colors of fire. The man kept watching for something, but he had no idea what it was. He would know when he saw it. Then he noticed what he was searching for. The little red fox was there. Through the dead land the man called home, it was limping aimlessly. The peacock stayed with the man, but with a flick of his finger, the dragon and the phoenix both flew toward the wounded fox. The fox was initially unaware that the two creatures were flying in his direction. What little energy remained in the fox made it turn as quickly as it could in an effort to escape. When it got to the fox, the phoenix dove down and landed in front of it, obstructing its course. The fox whimpered as he fell to the ground on his injured paw, realizing there was no way out. The dragon came and landed close to the fallen creature. With its eyes half closed and growls coming from its throat, the fox returned his gaze. He would fight to the end if he were to pass away. The dragon then turned to face the phoenix, which, with a wave of his head, flapped its wings and soared above the fox, grabbing the small fox and making sure he didn't inadvertently use its long talons to harm it. The fox made an effort to struggle, but its energy was gone. The fox was placed on the dragon's back by him. Both of them flew into the air once the fox was partially restrained on his back. As they flew, the phoenix watched over the injured fox to ensure it did not fall. The man was confronted by the phoenix and dragon. Leaping off the man, the peacock inspected the little fox. The man knelt down and embraced the fox. So terrified was the fox that he was trembling. The fox was small in comparison to the man. The fox closed its eyes as the man's other hand appeared. This was it. This man was going to crush him like a bug. However, a soft hand was petting his head in place of a crushing one. When the fox slowly raised its head, it noticed that the man was grinning affectionately, a smile that the fox was not accustomed to seeing. As he walked back to the village, the man said, "It is all right." The dragon, phoenix, and peacock stared at the fox as they went back to their original positions on the man. He told the fox, who was now feeling the weariness of its lengthy journey, "You're safe now." The fox closed its eyes and fell into a comfortable sleep. "You're home now." Slowly, Old Eyes opened. His eyes quickly adapted to his room's darkness. He hurried out of his room, put on his robes, and got dressed. He proceeded down his home's hallway, paused in front of a door, and opened it a little. His son was sleeping there, but he wasn't on his bed. In any case, not entirely on the bed. He was on the bed only with his legs. He's hanging off the bed the rest of the time. Once more, he had dozed off in his red GI. Clothes were all over the floor in his messy room, which he would have to clean later. With a little chuckle, he shut the door and went on down the hallway, pausing at the next door. His other son was there when he looked. Unlike his brother, he was still in bed even though he was asleep. He had his white GI folded and placed on his dresser so he could use it as soon as he woke up. His room was simple. It had only the necessities and was used for sleeping. He smiled and shut the door, realizing that his son needed to see that life was more than just training all the time. He proceeded down the corridor and came to a halt before the last room that was occupied. He silently opened the door and looked inside, just as he had done with the other rooms. His daughter was inside, sleeping just like her brothers. Pictures of her family and friends on her dresser and hanging from the wall, along with a few stuffed animals that she received from her family and friends, were a reflection of her loving personality and her room. He closed her door and proceeded to the front door, down the stairs, and down the hall. It was a cool night, and there was mischief all night long. Once more, it was that time of year. Time for mating. The villagers adore this time of year, but daughters' parents, particularly their fathers, hate it. Fortunately for him, his sons had not yet gotten close to anyone, and God forbid anyone from touching his daughter. Laughing, a young adolescent girl in a black trench coat with a hood rushed past him. A teenage boy ran after her from behind. "Kasara! Give it back!" the boy cried as he rode after her down the street. "Gomen Natsu, but if you want your coat back you're gonna have to catch me and get me out of it," responded Kasara. The boy's tail was the last thing he saw before they disappeared around a bend. As he made his way to his destination, he let out a laugh. As he made his way to his destination, he thought, "Ah, young love, so innocent." He strolled through the retail area. Around him, a variety of couples were taking advantage of the village's nightlife, and fathers were out seeking their daughters or their girlfriends, whichever came first. When he would walk by them, they would greet him with joy and respect, and he would return the favor. It took him around 15 minutes to walk out of the shopping area. He had time to reflect on his dream as he made his way through the less congested streets. He picked up the habit of stroking his beard many years ago, and his right hand came to face him out of habit. He kept thinking about his dream until he reached his destination. What is strange about this dream is that it is one that I have had before, except with my other children. He was standing at a big two-story house's front door. He took his hand out of his beard and rapped on the door. However, the door opened before he could, revealing an elderly man holding a cane in his right hand while wearing a white robe. He had a beard that reached the middle of his chest, but his head was hairless. People used to make jokes about how his hair preferred his face to his head. The white-robed man moved aside to let his guest in, saying, "Ah, Shikyokage-sama, please come inside." The Shikyokage went into his friend's house. He walked over to the living room. There was a pot of freshly brewed tea on the low table, ready to be used, and 2 cups on the other end of the little round table. When the Shikyokage visited his friend, he went to his usual seat. Sitting cross-legged at the table, the Shikyokage questioned, "You were expecting me?" As he sat down and poured the tea, the elderly man replied, "I had a feeling you would show up." While sipping their tea, they sat quietly. The Shikyokage collected his mind. The elderly man refilled his cup and said, "Tell me about your ideal old friend." Nothing ever escaped the Shikyokage's smile. To the elderly wise man seated in front of him, the Shikyokage continued to describe his dream in great detail. Even though he knew what his dream meant, he wanted to be sure. After he finished recounting it, he waited for his friend, who had closed his eyes in contemplation, to explain it to him. He awaited the answer. It was 2 minutes later. According to the Shikyokage, my dream must have a larger meaning if it is taking him this long to interpret it. He continued to wait. Another 2 minutes. Another 3 minutes. Another 5 minutes. Nothing has changed. Another 2 minutes. Then he received his response. Snore, snore. What did the Shikyokage think? He fell asleep. The Shikyokage couldn't contain his laughter. Reaching over, he roused the man who was sleeping. The bald man opened his eyes and remarked, "You young people have no patience." With a smile, the Shikyokage withdrew his hand. The Shikyokage pointed to his head and said, "I am not young. The days of my youth have long since passed. However, I still have most of my hair." He still had hair on the sides of his head, but the top of his head was bald. He had long, white hair. Near the end of his hair, which hung down to his waist, he kept it bound. Silence for a moment. The older man who was finishing his tea remarked, "Your dream is similar to the other dreams you had about your other children." The Shikyokage frowned at the fact that Yoken had once again finished the tea and replied, "I thought as much, Yoken. I just wanted to make sure. But this one will be more hurt than your other children, so trust is something that will be a bit difficult to obtain," Yoken said. The Shikyokage declared, "I can wait, even if it takes 100 years. I'm not worried about that." As the evening went on, the 2 longtime friends discussed their earlier years. When the Shikyokage left Yoken's house at nearly 6 o'clock to go back to his own, he was curious about the fox's personality and the reactions of his kids. He heard his daughter preparing breakfast as soon as he walked into his house. The table was occupied by his sons. His kids started to welcome him. The brown-haired one bowed his head and said, "Good morning, Otto-sama." The blonde's smile spreads as he says, "Morning, Pops." His daughter came in from the kitchen with a tray of food and said, "Good morning, Otto-san." She wore her long brown hair in a ponytail. After exchanging greetings, he took a seat to eat. He grinned again as he glanced up at his kids. The Shikyokage thought, "Looks like my family is going to get just a bit bigger." He heard his daughter yell at her older brother, "Stop throwing food in my hair." He began to laugh, but was struck in the head by the end of the wooden tray his sister used to carry the food in. His son rubbed the area where his sister's hand had struck him and exclaimed, "Ow! What the hell that hurt? I think I'm bleeding." "Yup, I'm bleeding." Naruto fixed his gaze on the road in front of him. At the moment, he stood at Konoha's main gate. His typically positive and upbeat demeanor was absent. It was replaced by a mood of melancholy and sadness. His eyes, which were normally full of unwavering resolve, were only shadows of the people they used to be. Naruto was shocked by what had happened just hours before. Those council members are jerks. They continued to treat him as though he were a lesser species despite everything he had done for this village. He questioned whether giving up all of his dreams and hopes was worth bringing Sasuke back. Rewind. Naruto was sprinting down a lengthy corridor, avoiding all of the obstacles in his path. The Baikochu bug that Shino had mentioned had been located by Naruto and Team 8. They did not go to get Sasuke, but they had allowed it to sniff his Hiyate. Shino believed that they needed to go back to the village and devise a strategy to get the betraying Uchiha back. On the other hand, Naruto was eager to pursue Sasuke right away. However, Naruto grudgingly consented to return to the village after Shino clarified that they were not in a fit state to pursue Sasuke. They informed the Hokage of their success as soon as they got to the village. Tsunade started formulating a strategy to get the Uchiha back. Being the impatient person that he is, Naruto left the meeting a few hours early, took the bug, and fled. After letting the bug out of its cage, Naruto followed it to the location he thought his friend might be. The bug had led him to a big dead tree close to the Fire Country border after 3 days of almost non-stop running. There was an underground entrance at its base. With extreme caution, Naruto stepped through the hole, his eyes darting around, looking for anything that might pose a threat to him. A big double door was in front of him when he got to the end of the hallway. Naruto approached, placed his hands on the door, and opened it, which was much heavier than he had anticipated. It was dark outside the door. Nothing was visible to him. The insect soared into the shadowy void. He followed the bug into the dark, which seemed to go on forever. Naruto believed the bug had let him down. I don't get it. The damn bug smelt Sasuke's headband. Why did it bring me here if he's not here? In fact, there's no one here. Naruto was furious. The hiding place appeared to be empty. When he had walked in, he had seen no one. He was about to head home, defeated, when the double door slammed shut, blotting out the little light it offered. Then light appeared as abruptly as the doors closed. It was getting lighter in the room. Naruto noticed that torches were the source of the light. They simply began lighting themselves. Naruto glanced around him as the last torch was lit. He was in a big room with a ceiling supported by pillars spaced a few meters apart. Then he caught his gaze. Sasuke, his target. His back was to Naruto as he sat. Without turning around, Sasuke remarked, "So, you finally arrived." Naruto walked over to his friend and said, "So you were expecting me, huh?" With his hands resting on his lap, Sasuke was seated in the lotus position. Naruto proceeded on his brief journey in the direction of the snakehead Sasuke was contemplating. He never took his eyes off his teammate. When Sasuke eventually got up and turned to face his former best friend, he asked, "What are you doing here, dude?" Naruto stopped 10 feet away from the enormous snake statue and said, "You know why I'm here, Sasuke. I'm here to bring you back home." There was silence for a while. The two shinobi remained motionless, awaiting the other to initiate contact. Naruto then laughed when Sasuke did something unexpected. A few giggles at first, then his laughter became louder and filled the room. Naruto's demeanor shifted from one of passivity to anger. When he finally finds Sasuke, after a year of searching, he laughs at him. "What's so funny?" No answer, just additional laughter. Naruto screamed, "What's so funny?" and hurled himself at Sasuke. He grabbed his collar as soon as he landed in front of Sasuke. Naruto, trying to control his rage so he wouldn't lose control and let the fox out, yelled, "Listen, Teme. Ever since you left, Sakura hasn't been herself. She cries at any little thing that reminds her of you. I've spent a whole year looking for you and now here I am. I don't deserve you laughing at me." There was a voice behind him that said, "Yes you do." When Naruto turned around, he saw another Sasuke with a smirk on his face standing where he had been. Naruto's eyes grew wide as he turned his head to face the Sasuke he was holding, only to see it vanish before his eyes as it faded into black mist. After dropping his hands to his sides and turning to face Sasuke, Naruto thought, "Genjutsu." The surprise was gone from his face. Jumping down from the head of the snake statue, Naruto remarked, "Looks like words won't bring you back." He dropped into his taijutsu stance after taking a kunai out of its pouch. "So I'll drag you back to Konoha, even if I have to break every bone in your body." Sasuke wanted to laugh again, but he refrained. What was causing a kunai to rush at his face? Sasuke easily avoided the lethal blade by cocking his head to the side. Until he felt something slipping down the right side of his face, that is. When he pulled his hand away after reaching up to touch the area, he discovered that he was bleeding. He hurt him. The Dobi hand still cut him, even though the wound was insignificant. The genin who died last in his class injured him, the top genin in his class. He was filled with anger. He noticed that Naruto had chosen to launch his attack when he looked up from his hand. Sasuke's face was the target of a punch that Naruto delivered. Sasuke pushed the fist away from its target with his left hand. Sasuke's elbow struck Naruto's chin, knocking him back before he could regain his balance. Naruto lost his balance and stumbled. Calmly, Sasuke approached Naruto and said, "I went easy on you the first time we fought." As he activated the renowned Sharingan bloodline of the Uchiha, he concluded, "I didn't kill before you since I once thought you a friend. But now I don't intend on being so merciful." When Sasuke charged at Naruto, he hardly had time to react. Sasuke felt as though he was moving in slow motion as Naruto moved to block a blow that was headed for his stomach. He was faster than before. Then, at the last second, he altered the trajectory of his blow and struck him squarely in the jaw again. The defense put up by Naruto failed. Sasuke used this chance to throw a flurry of punches, many of which were successful. He kicked Naruto in the ribs to end the attack, sending him crashing into a nearby pillar. Dropping to his knees, Naruto coughed up blood. The prisoner inside Naruto's body growled, "Let me kill him. This human means to destroy us." Naruto slowly stood up and said to the demon, "No, I made a promise." He finished spitting out the rest of his from his mouth and said, "And I intend to keep it." Naruto got back up and Sasuke gazed at him languidly. Despite the fact that he didn't learn much from Orochimaru before having to go back to Oto. But he should be able to get rid of this loudmouth annoyance thanks to what he did teach him. After taking a kunai out of his pouch, Naruto charged at Sasuke once more. Smiling, Sasuke chooses to make fun of himself. Sasuke ducked as Naruto slashed at his face, missing. Naruto kept slashing at Sasuke for a few minutes, but he managed to avoid it. Then, still holding the kunai, Naruto aimed a punch at Sasuke's face. As Naruto had hoped, Sasuke simultaneously ducked and moved to the right. He would have to use physical force if Naruto couldn't outspeed him. The kunai was brought down by Naruto. Sasuke's eyes grew wide as he realized he lacked the right footing to dodge, so he raised his arms and grabbed Naruto's forearm and wrist, stopping the kunai. To assist in pushing down the kunai, Naruto moved his left hand to his wrist. Sasuke was aware that Naruto was physically stronger than him and that this put him at a disadvantage. Additionally, he was above him, which allowed him to put more weight on the kunai. Sasuke was beginning to feel the deadly blade creep closer. Then Sasuke fell on his back, bringing Naruto down with him. To Naruto's surprise, Sasuke only needed to shift the kunai's trajectory to the right, believing he would escape unharmed, but the blade found its mark and dug deeper into the prior wound on his face. With a half-scream, half-growl, Sasuke pushed Naruto away from him with his leg and clambered to his feet, clutching his injured face as the seal on his neck spread over his body. Like a forest fire, the black markings that resembled flames spread across his flesh. Naruto noticed that Sasuke's body was starting to change when he looked up. The black flames that had previously covered his body were now spreading and joining together to form what appeared to be a second skin. From behind his prison, the Kyuubi remarked, "You see how he is changing. He wants us dead. Alone you are not strong enough to defeat him." One of Naruto's hand-shaped wings shot out from his back as he gazed at Sasuke. Now that he was changing, he realized he couldn't defeat Sasuke. The last time Naruto almost lost control, he refused to use the fox's power. Now that he was completely changed, Sasuke's hands started to move through a number of seals that Naruto was all too familiar with. The underground chamber was filled with the sound of 1,000 birds. Chidori, or copying it with the Sharingan learning, is the move he learned from Kakashi. The Chidori then destroyed the floor as Sasuke dragged it against it as he ran at Naruto. Naruto told himself, "I promised I would bring you back. And I never go back on my word." Now standing right in front of Naruto, Sasuke shoved the black Chidori into his stomach. Then everything darkened in Naruto's world. The sun had already set when Naruto woke up and found himself outside once more. He was so exhausted that he had a hard time getting up. When he turned to look around, he saw that Sasuke was lying face down a few yards away from him, his arm bent in an improper manner. Running on autopilot, Naruto picked up Sasuke and carried him on his back before starting the arduous journey home. 2 days later, he arrived in the village, but Sasuke was still asleep. Rather than the hero's welcome he would have desired, an Anbu squad met him and escorted him to the Hokage Tower and Sasuke to the hospital. He received very little leniency from the council. They permitted him to continue being a ninja, but he would never be able to advance in the ranks. He would always be a genin and could only accept missions at the D rank. The council had already made up its mind, regardless of how hard Naruto tried to defend himself or how strongly Tsunade or the other few respected clan heads defended him. Naruto lost everything he had hoped to accomplish and everything he had dreamed of that day. Suddenly, the sky grew dark. Naruto was reaching up to untie the headband that represented his loyalty when he failed to notice the black storm clouds filling the sky. The knot holding his headband on his head started to come loose with his fingers. There was a low rumble from the black clouds above. After untying the knot, Naruto took off the headband and gazed at it. This small piece of gear declared that he was a Konoha ninja. To prove his value, he had put in a great deal of effort to acquire this. But in the end, it didn't matter how hard he tried. Naruto hardly noticed the rain that started to fall from the sky. At Konoha, due to the unexpected downpour, the streets started to empty as people fled to their houses or the nearest available shelter. Kakashi, Hitaki and Chain entered the Kanai, a bar frequented by the majority of the village's ninja. The first thing he noticed when he walked into the bar was how many ninjas were there, laughing, telling stories, and generally having a good time. Kakashi went to the only vacant seat at the bar, which was next to Anko Midarashi, the most insane ninja he had likely ever encountered. From what he could see, she was currently downing 4 shots of an amber-colored liquid. She looked over and saw the one and only copy ninja sitting down beside her. With her 5th shot in her thin hand, Anko turned to face him and asked, "Well, if it isn't the great Kakashi Hitaki. What brings a person like you into my neck of the woods?" Kakashi, who had been at the meeting frantically attempting to defend Naruto after he left the tower, said in a weary voice, "Just needed to get out of the rain." However, the council would not be persuaded. She struck the bar, nearly causing the bartender to drop the glass she was cleaning, and remarked, "You look like you need a drink. Barkeep, get my friend here some Jack and make it fast." A shot glass was set in front of Kakashi in a matter of seconds. The glass cracked as he was wrapping his fingers around it. With a seductive smile on her lips, Anko said, "Damn Kashi, you need to learn to be more gentle. You know, I could probably teach you handle things with more care." Kakashi gave a little laugh. He pointed to her glass and remarked, "It looks like you're no more gentle than I am." Anko noticed her shot glass was cracked as well. "What are you talking about, ABO?" Around them, the two then heard more tiny cracking sounds. The two ninjas noticed that almost everything that resembled glass was broken or in the process of breaking as they scanned their surroundings. Anko questioned in confusion, "What the hell is going on?" Glancing around the bar, Kakashi replied, "I don't know." Alongside Naruto, it was raining more heavily. He was unaware. Everything around him was numb to him. His hold on his headband relaxed, and it started to drop to the floor. Alongside Kakashi until they nearly broke, the cracks started to spread and creep across the surfaces they were on. The ninja in the bar had no idea that this incident was occurring throughout the village. Every piece of glass, including windows, ornaments, and glasses, was broken. Naruto, he dropped his headband to the ground. The Kakashi, the broken glass surrounding the bar may have been better described as exploded, since glass was flung in all directions. In an instant, Kakashi grabbed Anko, pulled her down, and protected her from the glass fragments that were falling. Once all of the glass had stopped falling, Kakashi slowly got to his feet while assisting a blushing Anko. Kakashi shook the glass off his silver hair and said, "You all right?" With shyness, Anko replied, "Why? Yeah." She surveyed the glass everywhere. "So how many years of bad luck would this add up to?" Kakashi pointed to one of the windows outside and said, "More than you would think." There was glass everywhere, strewn all over the streets. They were still able to see all of the glass despite the intense rain. Naruto, the gods seemed enraged by what was occurring on earth below them, as evidenced by the loud crack of thunder that came from the heavens. Naruto started running after glancing ahead. Even he had no idea where he was going. There were more thunderclaps in the sky, but this time there were lightning strikes as well. However, Naruto ignored it and continued running. Fled from Konoha, the scowls, the hatred, and the suffering. Her sour tears persisted in the dark sky. Her tears were accompanied by flashes of enraged lightning and sounds of thunderous rage. But the rain didn't stop him from moving forward. He welcomed the rain after clearing his mind a little. In spite of finishing last in his class, Naruto gained knowledge nonetheless. He discovered that his scent was muffled by the rain, making it much harder for Konoha's tracking dogs to locate him. His legs were becoming weak. It makes sense that he would experience fatigue after running non-stop for almost 3 hours. He fell to the now muddy forest floor from the treetops. The mudded ground's thick texture stained his hands and pants, and he gasped for the air his lungs sorely needed as he lost the strength to even stand and fell to his hands and knees. In between his labored breaths, he told himself, I'll just take a small break. The rain kept pelting him in a fruitless attempt to erase his grief. Outside the gates of Konoha, Team 8 was returning to the village in a hurry. After learning that Naruto had fled with the Baikochu bug, they searched for him but were unable to locate him. They were heading home after receiving word from a messenger hawk that Naruto had returned to the village. The rain was beginning to fall even more heavily than it had previously. As she brushed away some hair that was stuck to her face, Team 8's sensei Karini Yuhi thought, this rain came out of nowhere. Perhaps she should follow her student's example and wear a jacket as well, so that she would at least be warm. We could now see the village gates. Karini made the somewhat self-serving request that her team quicken their pace in response to this sight. She was desperate to get home, get warm, and escape the rain. Perhaps Asuma could visit and warm her up. She chastised herself and flushed at the thought. She would never ask Asuma to do that. Well, perhaps he would if he so desired, but that wasn't important. Before anything else happened, she had to report to the Hokage. In addition, Kiba's whining was beginning to irritate her. At the rear of the group, directly behind her teammate Shino, was Hinata Hyuga, the heiress to the prestigious Hyuga clan. She couldn't help but exhale in relief when her team got the hawk. In addition to being safe, Naruto had successfully returned the traitorous snake, as she dubbed him, to the village. About 30 meters from the entrance, she noticed something in the mud. She knelt to pick it up when she got there. It was a headband. It was nearly completely covered in mud and grime. The lavender-eyed heiress pondered, how could someone drop this? It symbolizes a ninja's loyalty. Before placing it in her front pocket, she hurriedly cleaned off what she could, and hurried to catch up with her group. Perhaps she could track down the person who dropped it and give it back to them. With his friend Akamaru tucked under his hood, the young Inuzuka exclaimed, finally, now I can get home. Being out in the rain technically counts as a bath, right, sensei? When Kareni's team eventually entered the gates, she said, no, it doesn't, Kiba. And you're not going home yet, we still need to report to the Hokage. What can't you report to the Hokage by yourself? Kiba asked, his expression a little irritated. Karene's team stopped behind her when she stopped in the middle of the road. Her red eyes glowed with annoyance as she turned to face Kiba. Karini turned around and headed back toward the Hokage tower after saying, yes, I can, Kiba. But we are a team. And if I have to deal with a possibly drunk Hokage, so do you. Team 8 became aware that there was glass all over the streets at that point. As they surveyed their surroundings, they saw that all of the windows on every building were gone. The occupants of the building were occupied with cleaning what they could and covering their exposed structures with whatever they could. Wow, the fuck happened here? Kiba, watch your language. Sorry, sensei. Team 8 was relieved to be out of the rain when they eventually entered the tower, which also had missing windows. Candles and torches that were lit along the walls of the halls and stairways guided the team as they made their way to the top of the tower, where the Hokage's office was located. While they worked to fix the building, the workers nearby ignored them. Karini knocked on the Hokage's door and waited for a response. The door eventually opened, revealing Shazun, Tsunade's assistant. Despite the slightly dejected expression in her eyes, Karini remained silent. The first thing Team 8 saw when they were granted entry was a wasted Hokage. Large wooden panels were installed in place of the large window that formerly adorned the office's side in order to keep the rain out. The only source of light in the office was the lit candles. The wet dog user thought, ooh, what a shock, the Hokage is plastered. As she awaited a response, the red-eyed genjutsu expert started, Hokage. Sama Team 8 reporting in. The team standing in front of her desk, soaked from the rain, caught the Hokage's attention. They came back sooner than anticipated. Perhaps they could have changed Naruto's defense if they had come back sooner. Tsunade gave a headshake. It wouldn't have made a difference. Karini repeated, Hokage. Sama? Her leader was not typically inebriated. She would typically be happy, like when she's drunk, or even angry. However, this was more of a drunkenness brought on by sadness. The Hokage started talking before Kirin could inquire what was wrong. Naruto completed his mission and brought back Sasuke Uchiha. You will be compensated and your mission will not count as a failure. In search of the mission scroll, the Hokage rummaged through the jumble of papers and scrolls on her desk. It seemed to her that she had not consumed enough alcohol. She was still sympathetic to Naruto. She was kept somewhat sober by the pain in his eyes when the council rendered its decision. Where the hell is that fucking mission scroll? She thought she might break something if she didn't find it quickly. To make things worse, someone with a smile that barely fit his face burst into her office. Karini could tell the man was a civilian who worked in a government office just by observing what he was wearing. The ecstatic man put some papers in front of the irritated Hokage and said, Hokage-sama, I need your signature immediately. I know that these type of cases usually take some time, but everyone cleared these as soon as we could. All that need is your signature. The Hokage glanced down at the paper, but the words were not visible to her. She gestured for Kurne to come read the paper. The team's young players are beginning to feel the effects of the rain in the meantime. Damn it, W.Y circa C. Can we just leave? Kiba grumbled while gritting his teeth. The heiress from Hyuga responded, B. Because KK. Kiba. K.Kun the HH. Hokage hasn't dismissed us yet. Her shy stutters were replaced by icy ones. As usual, Shino remained silent, but it was evident that he was shivering a little. Karini read the paper with crimson eyes. It's a ninja letter of resignation, and a citizenship renouncement form. Who's it from? The Godem inquired. Karini skipped to the last page of the documents, where the signature was located. The name caused her eyes to widen. It's from Naruto Uzumaki. What? The Hokage cried, snatching at the documents and trying to read the signature. Confusion and questions were raging in the Hinata's mind in the meantime. Why would Naruto give up his ninja life? Furthermore, if he wasn't even a citizen, he couldn't become Hokage. This simply had to be a mistake of some sort. Before she went back to the village, what had happened to him? Reaching over her desk, the Hokage grabbed the man who brought in the papers by the front of his robes and lifted him off the ground, shouting, You! She screamed. Where is he? At the man. I don't K. No, he stammered, his face displaying obvious fear. He came in W. With a pack, ask F. For the papers F. Filled them out and left. Tsunade slammed her fists on her desk and dropped the terrified man. All of the other employees in the office turned away to protect themselves from the approaching wooden shrapnel as the desk burst into a hail of splinters, document papers, and scrolls. The Anbu guards outside the office appeared inside in response to the noise, ready to defend their leader. Tsunade turned to face Karasu, her headguard. 1. Find me Kakashi Hitaki, and bring a 2 tracking squads now. Taka nodded his head and vanished in a cloud of smoke. Set out to locate 2 tracking squads and possibly the village's strongest Jonin. Alongside Kakashi as Anko retrieved her keys to open her apartment door, Kakashi stood behind her. Kakashi chose to accompany Anko home on foot. Anko then went on a tirade about how, should all the glass in her apartment explode, she would require assistance cleaning it up. She was using the whole damsel in distress routine to entice him. And he was duped. Despite their best efforts to stay dry, they were both soaked from their journey to her house. It was uncomfortable to have a wet mask covering your mouth and nose, and Kakashi was beginning to have breathing problems. Anko heard Kakashi's labored breathing after she eventually located her keys and unlocked her door. She turned and smiled sensuously at him. Wow, got you breathing hard, and I haven't done anything yet. My mask is wet, so it's hard to breathe. Anko approached Kakashi and took a kunai out of his kunai pouch, saying, Hey, right, of course that's the reason. Kakashi gazed at the woman with the purple hair in front of him. Her damp hair, which was beginning to tumble out of her untidy ponytail, beautifully framed her face. There was a playful glint in her light brown eyes. He trusted her even though the kunai was now getting close to his face. Say ah. Kakashi opened his mouth, and Anko sliced through his mask to let him breathe freely. Anko slipped the kunai into her own pouch and said, Now that problem is solved, how about we continue this inside? That would be pleasant. He needed a diversion after what had happened earlier in the day. Yes, he kept telling himself that it was only a distraction, something to do to take his mind off his student's bad luck. But before he could respond, an Anbu ninja lowered his head and landed on his knee in front of the two. After delivering his message, the Anbu operative went off to get in touch with the tracking teams that were also required. Pardon my interruption, Hitaki. Sama, but the Hokage has called for you. The Hokage went and ruined Anko's fun after she muttered, Well, that sucks. Kakashi said, Sorry, Anko. I'll make it up to you. Kakashi leaned down and gave Anko a quick peck on the cheek before she could respond. He withdrew and headed back toward the Hokage's tower in the rain. Anko was stunned by what Kakashi had just done and froze. Her face was a pale pink, and she reached up and touched her cheek. Then a smile appeared on her face. He will make her up, he will. She was reminded that she was cold by a sudden sneeze that swept through her body. Turning, she went into her apartment. She saw shattered glass and rain streaming in through the shattered window. Yes, he will make up for his abandonment of her and her having to deal with the mess alone. Before she started cleaning up, she muttered to herself, Sly bastard. A teenager with blonde hair complained, "Man, this is so boring," as he collapsed backwards from his meditative pose. The eye of his older brother twitched. When someone is always complaining that meditation is boring, it can be very challenging to meditate with them. It's not dull to meditate. Their father would not have forced them to do it if he didn't think it was essential to their training. His younger brother let out another sigh of boredom. His eyes opened. Brown eyes gazed at his brother, now lying on his side, using his finger to draw in the dirt. "Would you keep quiet? If you do not want to meditate, then don't distract others. It's not my fault that Pops makes us do such boring things. I would much rather be sparring than meditating." The youngest of the three siblings was becoming irritated with their argument, which went on for a few more minutes. Her brothers were too preoccupied with their argument to realize that they were disturbing her, so she opened her emerald green eyes and glared at them. As she searched for something to throw at them, she thought, "This happens every time we meditate. It ends now." Two rocks the size of her fists lay behind her, as though placed there specifically for this purpose. They were still fighting when she picked them up and turned around. She hurled the rocks at them as a result. Her brothers could have easily escaped the projectiles aimed at their heads if this had happened at any other time. But they would always be distracted by their arguments about meditation. Both of her foolish brothers were knocked to the ground as the stones struck their target with a satisfying thump. Her blonde brother covered his left side of his head with his hands and exclaimed, "Ah! What the hell you doing, ya crazy bitch?" As she hastily stood up and strode over to her fallen brothers, her eye twitched once more. As he responded to her, her brother squirmed under her irate stare. "What did you just say?" Hoping his sister would believe his blatant lie, he told Cammy, I said, what the hell? Was with this crazy itch, yeah that's it." She put her left hand on her hip and pointed between the two with her right, reprimanding them like a mother would. "Whatever, I'll deal with you when we get home. But this needs to stop now," she yelled at them. "You," she said, gesturing to her oldest brother, "why do you always get brought down to his level when you're supposed to be the oldest?" I. The oldest stammered, uncertain how to respond to his younger sister, who was so irate that it was best to simply comply with her demands without arguing. He was silenced when she interrupted, "You know what, I don't care. You're going to stop all this arguing during meditation. Or I swear I'll make both your lives hell. Got it?" Her blonde brother began to complain, but was abruptly cut off with a glare. The oldest brother of Yuga said, "Okay, we'll stop, I swear." The second oldest simply muttered something to himself. That was the best she could hope for from them, she thought. She then took a seat again and resumed her meditation. She was the youngest, but she pretended to be the most mature half the time, and she was shocked by how immature her brothers could be. When her blonde-haired, foolish brother interrupted her meditation once more, she sighed and grinned, saying, "Damn, I think I'm bleeding." She had no desire to exchange her brothers for anything. "Yep, I'm bleeding." The fire danced before him, and he gazed at it. Naruto had never given fire much thought prior to all of this. Fire was primarily used to inflict damage and destruction in the ninja world. However, this comparatively basic element now provided warmth to his icy self and light in the otherwise pitch-black cave where he had sought refuge from the storm. A half-eaten field ration was left at his side as he sat there with his head resting on his knees and his legs pulled to his chest. He had been out of the village for around 20 hours. He was certain that a team had been sent by the village to try to kill or capture him. The elders wouldn't want their weapon to leave alive, even if he followed all the legal procedures to renounce his citizenship. As he gazed at the fire, his mind wandered a little. He wondered if his parents would have loved him and concluded that they probably wouldn't have. The moment the fourth Hokage needed to seal the Kyuubi, they most likely handed him over to him. An hour or so later, a gloomy laugh reverberated in the recesses of his thoughts. Abruptly, he was standing in front of the cage that contained the very thing that was causing him all of his suffering. The Kyuubi told his jailer, "All my thoughts about you were right after all." At this point, Naruto didn't care what people thought of him. He just stood there in front of the cage, staring at the ground. He was a walking corpse, broken and hollow, a shell of the person he used to be. The demon taunted the broken Naruto, saying, "You were weak. You should have destroyed them all. Yet you did nothing. All you have done is run. Only weaklings run." At his sides, Naruto's fist clenched so tightly that blood slowly started to trickle down his hands and his nails pierced his palms. How dare they mock him, Kyuubi? He was in this predicament because of him. Naruto's teeth were clenched as he said, "Shut up." The Kyuubi simply laughed at the command. His laugh gradually became louder until it reverberated mockingly throughout Naruto's mind. Naruto fell to his knees, covering his ears to try to block out the Kyuubi's laughter, and yelled, "Shut up!" at the demon in front of him. The laughter gradually faded until it was no more. Gazing up, Naruto fixed his gaze on the red eyes across the bars. He asked, "What's so funny?" But there was no response. Roard got to his feet and screamed angrily at the object of his suffering. "What's so funny?" His breath was labored, and tears began to well up in his eyes. But Naruto refused to cry in front of the monster. "Listen, all my life was a living hell because of you. It's because of you the village hates me. Because of you I have no parents. Because of you I will never be accepted. Because of you I have no one," Naruto said. The child in front of his prison was the only place where the great demon began. The weakness of his container infuriated him. How could this kid have been his jailer? He ought to have simply destroyed the village and taken off the seal. Trespasses such as the ones Naruto experienced would not be accepted in the demon world. Instead, the trespasser or the trespassed would die. Kyuubi found it incomprehensible that Naruto would not lash out at the village. If he were to do it, Kyuubi would like it. Naruto would just have to take out the seal and handle the rest. However, Naruto still won't let him go. Despite their hatred for him, he felt compelled to keep them safe. Despite the fact that the village made it very apparent that they did not want a demon to protect them. The Kyuubi heard Naruto whisper, "I wish you would just go away." Naruto sounded like a scared little boy, hoping the monster beneath his bed would disappear. However, the Kyuubi was one monster that would always be beneath the bed and could not be wished away, constantly observing and waiting for the ideal moment to arrive. A little laugh came out of the Kyuubi's mouth. Even though the Kyuubi would never acknowledge it, Naruto had gained some respect from the king of the Biju. "You can't get rid of me. No matter how hard you wish it, I'll still be here. Aside from the pain and suffering you have endured, I am the only constant thing in your life. I'm all you got." Naruto was having trouble breathing. Surprisingly, speaking with the Kyuubi depleted him. It was more like stating the obvious than actually speaking. Life was hell for him because of the Kyuubi. He was beginning to feel the effects of fatigue. Naruto sensed that he was losing consciousness. His eyelids started to close as sleep beckoned him into its tender embrace. His mind replayed Kyuubi's words just before he fell asleep. "I'm all you got." Kakashi jumped up and down branches. Pakun traveled directly alongside him, with the teams he commanded following closely behind. The rain continued to fall. As if to conceal Naruto from them, the rain persisted. Thus, Pakun's nose didn't really help. After leaving the village more than 10 hours ago, they rested for 3 of those hours. They made the decision to follow some footprints they had discovered going northwest. They would actually need to move if they wanted to catch up to Naruto because Kakashi was aware of his abilities. He glanced at his team with a slight turn of his head. When he first arrived at the Hokage's office, he was taken aback to see the typically reserved and quiet Hyuga heiress pleading with the Hokage to join the search. At first, the Hokage declined, claiming that their team was too worn out from their last search mission. To say that everyone was taken aback at the moment would be an understatement. "Then let me go. Karini, Sensei, Shino-kun, and Kiba-kun can stay here. Please let me go and search for Naruto-kun. Please." They were astounded that Hinata had never stumbled. Karini sensed the pain emanating from Hinata. She was aware of her emotions. It would be devastating to consider that Naruto might vanish from her life. She was aware that if they were unable to bring Naruto back, Hinata would be devastated emotionally. If there was anything she could do, she would not allow that to occur. She put a hand on Hinata's shoulder as she approached her, who was now starting to cry. Hinata's lavender-colored eyes betrayed her sorrow as she glanced up at her teacher. Karini turned to the Hokage and squeezed her shoulder. The Hokage sighed, knowing that Karini would ask for this on behalf of her student. "Hokage-sama, I ask that my team be permitted to join the search party." "Are you sure? Your team is tired. You should get some rest." "My team is fine. Besides, my team has worked under more strenuous conditions than this." Tsunade fixed Karini with her gaze, choosing whether or not to release them. Kiba's eyes shifted to the other 2 members of Team 8, who appeared a little irritated that they were returning to the rain. He appeared more irritated by his inability to return home than by Naruto's flight. However, from what she could see, Shino kept his typical expressionless expression. Her eyes finally shifted to Hinata. Hinata had a beseeching expression on her face, silently pleading for permission to pursue her crush. "Fine, you will be allowed to join the rest of the party." Hinata's face lit up with a tiny smile. "Arigato Hoke-sama." When Kakashi stopped, everyone else stopped as well. He turned to face a member of his group. Kakashi, a chunin with short hair, said, "Susanoo." She responded, leaping to the muddy ground below, "Hi Hitaki. Sama. She splashed to the ground. Her pale, nearly white skin and clothing were smeared with mud. Here, she and her group have decided to locate the Kyuubi container. After learning of the situation, Danzo was able to intercept the Anbu messenger and inform him that the other team was necessary because he was also sending his own team. To prevent any other village from using the Jinchiki against Konoha, she and her team were instructed to simply eliminate him. She slammed her hand into the mud, performed a few seals, and focused by closing her eyes. She sensed the vitality of the forest. She was capable of this. She was able to sense the chakra of every living thing in her immediate vicinity by emitting chakra pulses. Each individual has a distinct chakra signature. For a few moments, she looked around in an attempt to locate their target's large chakra signature. She has been informed that the Kyuubi container did a poor job of concealing his chakra signature. She leapt back to the tops of the trees after removing her hand from the mud. Near Kakashi, she landed on a branch. In a dead voice, Suza told Kakashi, "I could not locate the target's signature Hitaki, Sama." Kakashi looks around at his group. Since Sosa's team is Danzo's personal ninja, he did not trust them. He simply didn't know what their agenda was. "Hinata, Tenchi, your turn." "Hi," was their reply as they both turned on the Hyuga's renowned eyes. Tenchi belonged to the Hyuga's branch family. Hinata is only marginally younger than Heishi, Hinata's father. Having two Byakugan users would be very helpful in locating Naruto, even though he was able to see farther than Hinata. Tenchi pointed toward the object and said, "I see something. It's about 400 meters west." Tenchi led the group, and Kakashi said, "Lead the way, Tenchi." The group started to follow Tenchi. Hinata was a little let down that she wouldn't be able to see Tenchi as well. He was, of course, much older and more accustomed to the Hyuga's eyes. However, she pushes those ideas from her mind. She didn't need to think about herself right now. She came here in support of Naruto. They arrived at the location Tenchi indicated. Hinata saw Tenchi's hand almost instantly. Hinata immediately went to what Tenchi had observed after they landed from the treetops. It was an orange piece of cloth. In the entire village, if not the entire shinobi world, Naruto was most likely the only person who would be orange. The rain soaked the orange fabric, making it a deeper shade of orange. Over a thunderclap, one of the group members exclaimed, "I think I found a footprint." The footprint was good in every other aspect except for a small amount of water. Since it was close to a tree's base, the branches were able to block out the majority of the rain. As the rain continued to beat down on them like thousands of tiny fists, Tenchi remarked, "Looks like he is heading northwest from here. That's not good." Why isn't T? That G? G. Good? Hinata asked, shivering, which made her stutter once more. Tenchi responded. "Because Hinata. Sama, if he continues this direction he will reach the Kusa no Kuni border, and if he manages to cross it then we may not be able to find him," Kakashi concluded. Hinata's heart seemed to have stopped. Never again see Naruto. Naruto was her light, or something like that, which she could not understand. When no one else would believe in her, he did. Everyone, including Kiba, her own teammate and friend, advised her to forfeit her match against Neji during the Chunin exams. Nobody had faith in her. With the exception of Naruto, he had faith in her and thought she could conquer the world. However, she feared that without him, she would revert to her previous, frail state. As Akamaru ran around his feet playing in the mud, Kiba wrapped his arms around himself in a fruitless attempt to stay warm and remarked, "Well, I say good riddance, Naruto wasn't much of a ninja anyway. The village is better without him." Karini gasped. According to what she had heard, Kiba and Naruto were childhood friends. It's possible that Kiba was still upset about Naruto defeating him in the Chunin exams, or Hinata's attention to him in general. Karini was about to say, "Kiba, I can't believe that you would," when a loud slap echoed in front of her. Kiba was lying on the ground with his left cheek supported by his hand. Over him, Hinata was standing. Everyone was shocked when Hinata, the most timid and shy ninja they had ever met, slapped Kiba, with the exception of Danzo's agents. Kiba was stunned beyond belief. "Hinata," Kiba uttered quietly, "don't you ever talk about Naruto-kun like that." "Naruto-kun is 3 times the ninja you will ever be," shouted Hinata. Then she took off in the direction indicated by the footprint. As Shino helped Kiba to his feet, Kakashi remarked, "Let's move, we better not let her get too far on her own. We have wasted too much time here." All of them nodded, and Kakashi carried on with their mission, hoping to locate Naruto before Danzo's ninja did. What their orders are, who knows? The Shikyokuge read and signed the forms in front of him in silence while seated at his desk. Although many leaders dislike paperwork, he didn't mind it at all. Simply put, paperwork is a necessary task. His focus shifted to the person entering his office as the door opened. His daughter was the one. She wasn't wearing her training attire. She was wearing what she described as her everyday clothes. She wore a red t-shirt that appeared to have been taken from her blonde brother's closet, along with some baggy jeans. She had her blue hair pulled back into a ponytail at waist length. What a surprise, Yuga. The Shikyokage let himself unwind and recline in his chair, saying, I hope you're not skipping out on your meditation. Yuga approached her father with a smile on her face and embraced him. After releasing her father from her embrace, Yuga said, Of course not Otto-san. We all finished meditating, not without the usual problems, but we finished nonetheless. So I came to ask if there was anything else that we need to do. Choosing to omit the information that her two foolish brothers immediately decided to fight. The leader paused to reflect. His right hand reached his chin and started to stroke his white beard. The Shikyokage said, Not right now. The leader's daughter started to leave, saying, Okay, then I guess I'll head out now. Before she departed, he called out to her, Wait Yuga, may I ask where you are going? Why? With a smile on his face, he asked, Does a father need a reason to know the whereabouts of his children? I guess. Well, if you must know, Kasara and I are going to go check on our new friend. For a brief moment, the Shikyokage pondered who she was referring to. Ah yes, the one who came about 7 months ago. She was in such bad shape when Zaku brought her here. It was also quite difficult removing that seal on her shoulder. Poor child, she was in so much pain. Please send her my regards. And if she needs anything at all, she only needs to ask. Yuga nodded as she left her father's office to head to the hospital. On her way to meet up with her friend so they could go to the hospital, she strolled through the village. She would say hello to everyone who greeted her along the way and occasionally pause to talk to any of her other friends. Many people greeted her because she was the village leader's daughter. She saw her friend moving through the crowd as she was speaking with one of the village elders. She excused herself politely and went to her friends. Her boyfriend was walking beside her, so she wasn't alone. And their child, as she liked to call him, was soundly asleep in her arms. Kasara, she exclaimed as soon as she was sufficiently near. When Kasara heard someone calling her name, she turned. She waited for her friend to get to her after waving at Yuga. What took you so long? Natsu and I were heading to hospital without you. Yuga says, Hi to you to Kasara. Natsu-san. As he stood beside Kasara with his arms folded and his extra appendage occasionally moving behind him, Natsu responded, Miyabita-san. Before they could begin, Natsu asked, Kasara, when are you going to give me back my coat? Kasara glanced at him before turning to face herself, who was currently wearing it. When she wore it, the long black trench coat that hung down to his ankles would drag on the ground. With a playful smirk on her lips, Kasara asked, Now why would I do that? Because it belongs to me. I gave it to you. So, Natsu sighed. She was unattainable. So that means I can use it whenever I want, and since you're my boyfriend I have more of a right to use whatever I want. Besides, Kasara went on, approaching him, it lets me play with this. She reached behind Natsu and took hold of his tail, which is the reason he wears his coat. Natsu suppressed a moan. He didn't like how sensitive his tail was. Kasara also enjoyed playing with it. She would constantly say that she wished she had a tail at birth. Natsu hoped he wouldn't make a fool of himself by purring, especially in public. Fortunately, Yuga, who was growing irritated, stepped in and released him from Kasara's hold. Natsu put his tail around his waist right away, thanking Yuga in silence for the rescue. Yuga said, If you two are done now, can we go now? Yuga ruined Kasara's fun, and she scowled. She was correct, though, that they ought to move. Thus, they proceeded to the medical facility. As Yuga and Kasara conversed beside him, Natsu frowned and failed to retrieve his coat. When they arrived at the hospital, they went inside. The group headed to the place where their friend was staying because they already knew it. When they arrived at the door, they opened it. At their entrance, a nurse who was in the room noting some information on a chart paused. The patient was in bed when the nurse said, Well, it looks like you have some company. The patient said, No shit Sherlock. I'm not fucking blind, ya know. The nurse was making a concerted effort to maintain her composure, as evidenced by her expression. Before losing her temper, she went back to marking a few more items on the chart, put it back on the front of the bed, and left the room. Taking the initiative, Natsu went to the window and sat down. Kasara and Yuga took seats on the bed's sides. Yuga said, Hey, so how are ya doing? A strand of her maroon hair was blown out of her face by her friend. What do you fucking think? The sheets are itchy as hell. The bed is uncomfortable as hell. And the food fucking tastes like crap. And this fucking thing here won't give more than 3 shots of morphine an hour. And to top it all off, my shoulder is fucking killing me. Before her friend could say anything more, Yuga remarked, "Damn, we asked how you were, not your life story." The girl's attention was diverted to Kasara by a slight sound. Her kid was starting to stir. A yawn came first. Then, slowly, its golden slit eyes opened to take in its new environment. Kasara glared at her friend with the same hair color. "See what ya did? You woke Ryan up, so, that oversized house cat sleeps too much anyways." Kasara became enraged and turned to face Natsu, who was slowly swishing his tail back and forth while staring out the window, utterly oblivious to what was happening inside. Kasara's scowl grew as she returned her focus to Ryan, who was now investigating and sniffing everything in front of him on the bed. To her friend, Kasara clarified, "He is not a house cat. He is a cub. There is a difference, ya know." Kasara's friend with the maroon hair pulled her legs away from the cub and said, "Well, whatever he is, keep him away from me." She reached over to scratch Ryan behind his ears, and Yuga laughed. With a purr, the cub returned to its rest. Before turning back to the cub, who was now on his back and reaching out with his paws to try and catch Yuga's fingers, Yuga made air quotes and said, "Kasara, I thought you would have remembered by now that Yuya prefers bats over anything else." Yuga's assertion had the intended impact. After turning her head and applying a little pink dust to her face, her friend did what any proper lady would do. She snubbed them. Yuga and Kasara burst out laughing. Natsu simply waited for this visit to end so he could return and resume his training while sitting at the window. Natsu looked at the patient with the marooned hair. He watched as her thumb repeatedly pressed the morphine button. He gave a little laugh. Yuya scowled at her two friends and thought, "Damn thing won't give me my morphine." She never really had any friends. However, she had to concede that they weren't all that horrible for two chatty, noisy harpies. A very long thunderclap roused Naruto from his tumultuous sleep. He is unable to determine how long he slept. The rain outside kept the land in a constant state of darkness by blocking out the sun. It seemed to be a perfect reflection of him. The fire was now only embers, and a chill ran through his body. He tried to warm himself by giving himself a hug when he shivered again, but it was ineffective. Now he had no one and nothing. In any case, he didn't really have anyone. He found himself thinking about his friends. Would he be missed? When they learned that he had fled, would they be pleased? As he considered each of the people who knew him, he pondered this question. For a few more minutes, Naruto kept thinking about who would miss him. Iruka. Sensei, he would miss me. He was nice to me more than anyone. Kakashi. Sensei, he never really cared for me. Sasuke was his favorite. Tsunade. Ba. Chan, she came back to the village because of me. She was like a mother or an older sister to me. Sasuke, he would not miss me. Just because we were on the same team doesn't mean he liked it. I considered him a brother. But brothers don't try to kill each other for reason as stupid as power. Sakura, she definitely wouldn't miss me. She always beat me and made fun of me. Hinata, Naruto said as he approached the cave's entrance in the pouring rain. I never got the chance to really get to know her. But she was always nice to me whenever we did talk. She was the only one who encouraged me before my fight with Neji in the Chunin exams. I wish she was here right now. She might know what to say to make me feel better. He was startled out of his reverie by the Kyuubi's voice. You better get moving, kid. We've stayed too long here. In response to the Kyuubi's statement, Naruto remained silent. He was aware that the Kyuubi was correct. The village would have been near him by now if they had sent hunter ninjas after him. He was nearly dry now, so he got up and stretched. That wouldn't matter, though, because the rain would pelt him with water the instant he emerged from the cave. Before falling asleep, Naruto reflected on what the Kyuubi had said to him. He was correct in a sense. He was alone now. As much as he hated to admit it, the Kyuubi was all that remained of him. With his hands raised in front of him, Naruto created the seal for his most frequently used jutsu. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 10 copies of himself appeared in front of him at once. They all had the same dejected expression as the original. All right, you all know where I'm going, so if you see anyone coming after me, try to slow them down. They all nodded and fled the cave, heading in different directions into the chilly rain. The original made their way to the cave's entrance. At the cave's entrance, the water cascaded down like a waterfall. Naruto pulled his map out of his pack. He knew some fundamentals but was never very good at reading maps. He put the map back in his pack after estimating that he would arrive at the border of the Land of Fire in roughly a day and a half. He continued his journey toward the Kusa no Kuni border without hesitation, running into the rain like he was diving into water and getting soaked again. When his clones encountered a ninja pursuing him, they would attempt to slow them down by running or fighting, depending on the circumstances. Because the ground was muddy, Naruto's leap into the tops of the trees left too many footprints. With Kakashi, inside a cave, Kakashi was kneeling and examining the remnants of a fire. Although he was unable to determine how long ago it had been used, it appeared to have been used recently. All he could do was hope that Naruto had used this cave. In order to find any clue that could aid them in their mission, he and his team, minus Danzo's ninjas, scouted the area around the cave. He was interrupted from his thoughts by a call from Kurenai. As she showed him what she had discovered, she remarked, he was definitely here. The field ration had been partially consumed. Since only Konoha had dark green wrapping on their rations, that was unquestionably a Konoha ration. Naruto thus went through this area. They had little time because of that. It might take an additional 3 days to obtain authorization to enter the neighboring country of Konoha if he managed to cross the border before they apprehended him. Danzo's 3 ninjas entered the cave before Kakashi could speak. As raindrops trickled down from her and her group onto the cave's stone floor, Suza remarked, Hitaki. Sama, we have found some tracks. Hinata heard no better news all day than that. She had been silent for the remainder of the mission after her brief outburst the day before. Kiba deserved to be hit, but she felt bad about it. Nobody, especially Naruto, should be spoken down to. In the hopes that the tracks would take them to her crush, she questioned, W. Where are the tracks going? The tracks split into several directions. We believe that he created clones in an attempt to lose us. Hinata's optimism waned further. Kakashi exhaled deeply. This was not going to be made simple by Naruto. However, Kakashi had anticipated this. Kakashi inquired, in what directions were they going? They split into 11 different directions. Some of the tracks go by ground, others by tree. There are 3 sets that seem like they are going back to the village, so I believe we can ignore those. That leaves 8 tracks. There are 10 of use. We are going to have to split up in order to find Naruto. Alright, does everyone have their flares? Everyone in Kakashi's group nodded. If you find the real Naruto, launch flares. Hopefully more of use will be in the same area and we will come to assist. Suza used the tracks. Suza led the group to tracks that pointed in the direction they were going after, nodding. After everyone was aware of their course, they all followed Naruto and his clones led. It was very hard to follow the footprints on the ground because of the rain. She had asked to go alone, and Hinata followed her trail. She was taken aback when Kurenai appeared suddenly. However, she reasoned that they were running out of time and that arguing would only make them waste more of it. After 100 yards or so, Hinata's tracks began in the trees and moved through the mud. She fervently hopes that Naruto will be found using her tracks. Perhaps she could persuade him to accompany her back to Konoha. All she could do was hope. Suza was jumping through the trees with Ryushi, one of her teammates. It was more difficult than usual to track him because this path was mostly in the treetops. It is roughly 5 times more difficult to track through trees than it is on the ground, and the rain made it even more challenging. Suza and Ryushi were jumping from tree to tree when Suza thought, we will not fail you, Danzo. Sama, I will find the Kyuubi and bring you back his head. Outside, aside from the unrelenting rain, the only sound audible was the sound of quiet breathing. If anything, it felt like the storm was getting stronger every time it went by. A few candles were the only source of light in the space, and their orange flames illuminated the entire space. To keep the rain out, the windows had been boarded up. She believed that the village was being attacked once more when all of the glass in her home broke. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. However, Sakura's only thought at the moment was of her injured teammate, who was unconscious on the bed in front of her. When she discovered that Sasuke had returned, she hurried into the storm and headed straight to the hospital because he was in poor condition. Sasuke was still undergoing surgery when she got there. He had almost been destroyed by Naruto. When he did this to her beloved Sasuke-kun, what was going through his mind? Sakura only knew that she would beat Naruto to within an inch of his life the next time she saw him. She believed that this was more than he deserved, considering how he had defeated Sasuke to within a millimeter of his life. She was startled out of her reverie by a flash of lightning. As the pouch dripped slowly, she watched it hanging over Sasuke's bed. Casts and bandages covered the rest of Sasuke. Seeing him in this state, broken and on the verge of death, hurt her. He needs assistance simply to breathe. She yawned as she fought to remain conscious. When Sasuke woke up, she hoped to be the first thing he saw. Sakura fervently hoped it would happen soon. He was right behind him, grateful that any noise he made was muffled by the rain and lightning. I hope I got the right one, Kakashi. In front of him, Naruto stood on the precipice of a small cliff, staring off into the distance as he tried to figure out how to get over or around it. At this point, Kakashi took action. He wouldn't need to use his flare if he could defeat Naruto before he realizes. Hopefully, this was not one of his clones, because if it was, Naruto would get the memories and realize how close they were if he did something wrong and scattered them. He approaches Naruto in silence, moving slowly past the tree line. The sound came from the rain. When Kakashi saw Naruto move, he froze. All Naruto did was raise his hand and shield his eyes with it. The breath Kakashi had been holding was released. A huge error. Naruto swiftly moves to where the sound was coming from. In a nearly lifeless voice, Naruto murmured, "Kakashi, sensei." Kakashi swore to himself. How could he have committed such a foolish error? All Naruto could do was look at him with his eyes full of sorrow. Kakashi cringed inwardly at his normally contented looking pupil. Naruto questioned, "Did you come here to kill me?" as he saw Kakashi wince. Slowly approaching Naruto, Kakashi replied, "No Naruto, I'm here to bring you back home." Naruto laughed. "That place was not my home. A home was a place where you were safe. So believe me when I say that that was not my home." Kakashi stopped about 5 feet away from Naruto and said, "Regardless, my orders were to bring you back. Just come back with me quietly, I don't want to hurt you." Kakashi. "Sensei, I'm not going back. There is only one way you can take me back, and that's if you kill me, and drag my lifeless corpse back." Kakashi was taken aback by Naruto's reaction. Kakashi was aware that he could easily subdue him and restrain him. However, that was to prevent him from doing something like biting his tongue. "I don't want to hurt you," Kakashi said again, getting ready but staying motionless. Naruto chose to act rather than speak. Pulling a kunai from his leg holster, he ran at Kakashi. As he avoided Naruto's kunai swipes, Kakashi swore. Kakashi was aware that knocking him out was the only way to apprehend him. Kakashi awaited Naruto's overreaching attack before striking. Then Naruto overswung, just as Kakashi had hoped. Kakashi swiftly turned to face him and delivered a blow. Kakashi had never been a big believer in religion or God. However, he found himself silently pleading with whatever god or gods would listen that the Naruto in front of him would stay here when his strike connected. His blow was successful, and his response was given to him. Should a god or other divine entity have heard his prayer, they chose not to respond, because he vanished in a cloud of smoke after he cut at the back of Naruto's neck. Kakashi clenched the fist he used to launch the attack and whispered to himself, "No." His fist started to shake, and he repeated, "Damn it, damn it." He made a mistake. He believed the Naruto he discovered to be the original. The real Naruto would now be aware of their proximity. As he hurried back to the location where his team had split up, Kakashi could only hope that one of the other members would discover Naruto. Once more, he found himself in prayer. Perhaps God or someone else would hear him and grant his request. Around the same time with Suza, the target was escaping through the tops of the trees after spotting them. Due to her partner's negligence, their target became aware of their presence and fled like a ferocious animal. Suza had to acknowledge that she might have missed her target in the rain if he hadn't been wearing such a bright color. Suza told her partner, Ryushi, "Keep looking at him. I'll get a hold of him and cut him off." Suza fell to the ground and rushed to stop Naruto when Ryushi demonstrated that he understood. On the ground, Suza could move more quickly than she could in the trees. And based on her observations, her target didn't appear to notice her. She ran up a tree and out of Naruto's line of sight, pursuing him through the trees once more. Without Naruto noticing, Suza approached him gradually. However, Naruto's progress was slowed by her frequent and erratic changes of direction. She leapt farther into the trees, nearly beyond the canopy of the forest. When she got close enough, she pulled out the blade strapped to her lower back and got ready to hit. She finally got within range after a few more leaps, and she immediately launched herself at her target. She impaled her blade into the base of the Kyuubi's neck, causing him to lose his balance and start to fall to the muddy ground below. His jailer was unaware of what had hit him. As the blade sank into her target, he screamed in surprise. However, the sound he made sounded more like a gargling sound. When Sosa's blade sank into Naruto's body, she thought, "I have done it. Danzo Sama will be most pleased." Her glory was short-lived, though, as she fell alone as her target exploded into a cloud of smoke. Apart from the damage to her pride, she was able to land safely. A few seconds later, Ryushi was at her side. As she put her weapon back in its sheath, Suza said to her partner, "We have to go back to where we split up, and hope that Kimono kills the Kyuubi." As they started to head back to the location where the split up took place, Ryushi informed her, "You know what will happen if Kimono doesn't. Danzo Sama does not tolerate failure." As she ran, Suza decided not to carry on the conversation. She was aware of the consequences for herself and her group. There was no tolerance whatsoever for failure. They would be punished severely if they came back empty-handed. Naruto stopped sliding. 2 of his clones had suffered some sort of mishap. It seemed as though he had experienced what had happened to his clones. His mind was filled with memories of being struck and stabbed. Someone he had never seen before had attempted to kill him after Kakashi had hit him, well, his clone, in the back of the neck. He could see that a team was pursuing him, and they were in close pursuit. He was unable to determine how many more people were searching for him, but he needed to keep going before he could think about it any longer. He got back on his feet and headed for the border. He could essentially vanish if he managed to cross the border. The land was still soaked by the rain, which had not stopped. The land was briefly illuminated by lightning flashing through it before the darkness took back the area. Above in the clouds, thunder roared, cracked, and boomed, giving the impression that a monstrous beast had woken up to exact its revenge on the land. It didn't slow down the former Konoha ninja, though. He was only thinking about leaving the land of fire at the moment. The only thing preventing him from recalling what had transpired just a day and a half prior was this thought. He didn't want to chance a new dispute with his renter. He had wasted far too much time on that. Naruto spent several more hours on his journey. As Naruto approached the tree line, he halted just short of it, took off his pack, stretched his aching muscles, took a brief pause to catch his breath, and scouted the border. To be as covert as possible in case someone was policing the border, Naruto drew closer to the line. In the event that there are ninja, Naruto watches in silence in the hopes of spotting any and figuring out how to get across the border covertly. Leaning against a nearby tree, Hinata tried to catch her breath as fast as she could. When Hinata pulled a map out of her backpack, she felt as though she must be close. Hinata slowly calculated every aspect of her mission while gazing at the map. She realized after a moment that she was very near the border. She would never see Naruto again if she could locate him right now. Her chest ached at the thought. She needed to move quickly because Naruto might have already left the nation. She hurriedly put the map back in her pack and kept following the footprints that left their marks on the ground. Something caught the Hyuga heiress's attention, causing her to halt. To get a better look without risking her identity, she triggered her family's bloodline. The backpack was a shinobi standard issue. She was immediately aware of Naruto's presence. Moving slowly toward the pack, she looked around, her eyes searching for her ideal partner. After a few seconds, she turned off her bloodline and failed to notice him. What had taken place? Was he assaulted? Was he okay? Hinata began to panic gradually. She was searching her mind for a solution. She turned back to the pack. It was leaning against a tree's base. The immediate calmed Hinata a little because it didn't appear that there was any sort of struggle. The location of the pack suggested that Naruto had put it there. Hinata's rain-soaked form was once again filled with hope. A voice called out to her left, "Hinata." When Hinata turned, her secret love was there to greet her. Hinata gazed intently at him. His jacket and pants were ripped in multiple places. His blonde hair fell to his brow without the headband holding it in place, and his clothes were stained with mud. Hinata couldn't help but feel warm every time she saw the typically smiling blonde, even in his current state and circumstances. Naruto. Naruto went back to his pack's location. Since there were no ninja on patrol, he assumed he could cross without any issues. However, Naruto was shocked to see someone near his pack. His heart stopped when he realized he had been located. Although his pack had been located, Naruto wasn't really rational. All he could do was stand there and gaze at the individual at his pack. The individual was dressed in mud, stained purple shinobi pants and a big beige coat. His gaze moved to the person's face that he could make out. Light-skinned, short, midnight. Blue hair adored the head. Naruto was aware of only one person with that particular color of hair. Her name escaped his lips before he could stop himself. Hinata. Hearing her name, Hinata turns. Naruto was correct in his guess. I heard. The Hyuga's distinctive eyes were a dead giveaway. Her face was perfectly framed by her damp hair, which clung to it. Naruto. He was startled out of his reverie by Hinata's voice. She was looking directly into his eyes. She seemed to be peering directly into his soul. Her eyes were filled with concern as she searched for the source of his pain. Not wanting to look at her, Naruto turned his head. What are you doing here? When Naruto turned his head and decided to look elsewhere, Hinata felt a little offended. She desired to assist him. I circa C. Came looking for you. Hinata wishes her shyness weren't a curse. Still unwilling to look at Hinata, Naruto turned his head to the side. Well, you found me. Now what? Hinata was at a loss for words. He gave the impression that they were merely playing a game and that she could leave now that she had located him. Hinata said, Naruto, as she approached him slowly. Come back. See, come be. Back. T.T.To the versus village. Naruto jerked his head back, his eyes glaring at Hinata. The sight of anger in her crush's deep blue eyes caused Hinata to halt abruptly. So you were also sent after me to who? Tell me, Hinata, why should I go back? A lump appeared in Hinata's throat, and she swallowed. She was unable to ruin this. She must persuade Naruto to accompany her back. Please, Naruto.kun. Tsunade. Sama is worried. Naruto laughed aloud. When someone finds something mildly funny, they don't laugh. A sardonic laugh. She's not worried about me. Of course she is, Hinata said, shocking Naruto by interrupting him. Hinata sensed that tears were starting to well up in her eyes. Hinata was more assertive than Naruto had ever seen her. Everyone is worried about you. You're wrong. I bet they don't even know I'm gone. Hinata said nothing. She was aware of that. The fact that he had returned was largely unknown. I thought so. Hinata, I'm not going to go back. There is nothing left for me there. Hinata's eyes started to water. Naruto had no intention of returning voluntarily. Her shoulders started to tremble as her tears blended with the rain. The weight of Naruto's words was too much for her to handle, and she gradually lost the will to stand and fell to the ground. She recalled that Naruto had no parents to ease his suffering or even a recollection of them, and that he was not well liked in the village. The storm grew stronger. A fierce wind rustled the leaves as it passed through the trees. Thunder and lightning ripped through the stillness and sky. The amount of water that fell made the rain seem like a waterfall. No one loves me there. Going back there means going back to be hate, the glares, the pain. There are people who love you, Hinata said, looking directly into Naruto's eyes. You're wrong. As Naruto stared back at Hinata, he said, don't lie to me, Hinata. I'm not. Naruto was unable to control the rage that began to seep into his voice as he said, Hinata, there is no one. You're wrong. Stop it, Hinata. There are people. Naruto was growing agitated and said, Hinata. Who care? Naruto yelled, I'm warning you, Hinata, as he strode toward Hinata. People who love you. Hinata's voice rose to her own level. Naruto yelled at the girl in the mud, there's no one, as his rage grew stronger by the moment. You're wrong, urged Hinata. No, I'm not. You're wrong, Hinata said again. Then who, Hinata? If you tell me who, then I'll go back. Hinata was about to respond, however, she was unable to speak. In her mind, Hinata yelled, what are you doing? Tell him you love him. This is your chance. Naruto stood right in front of her and shouted, well, Hinata, at her. Tell him. What are you waiting for? Unable to bear it, she lowered her head and shed more tears. Bit by bit, she could feel her heart breaking. She couldn't express to her partner that she was among those who loved him. She couldn't bring herself to tell Naruto she loved him, even though this was her chance to bring him back to the village. She cursed her frailty. Naruto told Hinata, I thought so. His voice could barely be heard over the thunder and howling wind. Hinata whimpered, hoping he would reconsider, please don't go. In front of her, Naruto knelt. He gently raised her head until she was staring at him after placing his hand on her chin. Her eyes were filled with sadness, which Naruto could see. He pulled her into an embrace slowly. Thank you, Hinata. Thank you for caring, and I'm sorry. Naruto let her go and got to his feet. Maybe I'll get to see you again someday. Naruto turned once more and made his way to the edge of the trees. He turned back to Hinata for a final glance as he got to the edge. He circled back and started for the border. Hinata cursed her own words. She cursed herself for being so frail and letting her love go when she had the resources to keep him by her side. Her flare suddenly came back to her. She reached into her pouch and picked up the flare. Everyone would come and bring Naruto back if she used this. After he returned to the village, everything might return to normal. She reached for the ignition string with one hand. Naruto will be brought back by the rest of the team with just one pull. Once more, though, she was unable to pull. Like she wanted to tell Naruto that she loved him, Hinata yearned to pull. She was unable to do it, though. The flare rolled out of her hand onto the muddy ground as her hold on it relaxed. Hinata simply broke down when she felt her heart break. Her tiny body ached with sobs that kept getting louder until the winds, which had subsided and the rain had somewhat decreased, nearly drowned out her cries of anguish. It was almost as though the gods sensed her suffering and calmed the storm a little for her benefit. She couldn't give a damn, though. She could only feel the pain in her chest and the sense of weakness because the love of her life was no longer there. Leaving his pack behind was a mistake. His pack had been the last thing on his mind because he had been so engrossed in the moment. However, he now wished he had brought his pack as he traversed this barren area. He continued eastward after crossing the border, seemingly escaping the rain after a few miles. The rain had stayed with him. He wished now he had crossed the border once more after running along it. He was in the wastelands, if his memory served him correctly. Because these lands are so useless, no nation has claimed them. He was unable to recall how long it had been since he had arrived in this land of gods. He had the impression that he was going in circles. Everything around him had the same appearance. Give or take the occasional tree or animal skeleton from his father, which he began to believe were always the same. Naruto paused and surveyed his surroundings. His lips were dry and cracked, and he licked them. He could see that there was no water anywhere, and he was extremely thirsty. He raised his hand to shield his eyes from the sun's rays as he turned to face it. The land was scorched by the heat of the fiery ball of fire that sat in the center of the sky. I thought of the expression, out of the frying pan and into the fire. He would be happy to get back into it if it were the rain. He lowered his eyes back to the ground and proceeded across the desert. The Kyuubi would not perish, so he waited in his cage as if he had nothing better to do. He resisted passing away. He ruled the Biju as its king. He would not perish while confined in a weakling host. However, the seal was too strong for him to simply break free. However, he was aware of an escape route. He had only two options for getting out, and his host couldn't do either of them. However, the other option might work, and the time was near, but he needs to time it perfectly. He would perish if he made even the smallest error. He simply needed to wait for a while. He must act just as his host is about to die, or else he runs the risk of dying along with him. As he waited, Kyuubi thought, soon I'll escape this prison and enact my revenge. Naruto tripped over what appeared to be a charred log that was partially buried in the ground. He kicked it while staring at it. Given how exhausted he was, bumping it with his foot would seem more appropriate. Naruto turned back to continue, muttering, "Stupid log." However, he felt the ground tremble before he could move another step. At first, it was barely perceptible. Nevertheless, Naruto paused for a brief moment. Naruto lost his balance and fell on his back as a result of the ground trembling more violently before he could continue. In an attempt to locate the cause of the shaking, Naruto sat up as fast as he could and looked around. He turned to look behind him when he heard low rumbling and earth cracking, and he was frozen by what he saw. His heart was clutched by the cold fingers of fear. He began to breathe more heavily, nearly to the point of hyperventilation. He vowed that his heart would burst from his chest because it was beating so fiercely there. He shivered in fear, more perspiration covering his already sweaty body. Their eyes were as large as they could be. Snow. White knuckles. Mind attempting to make sense of what he was seeing. The thing that terrified him rose from the crumbling ground. The beast was encased in a black and white shell. It is supported by 8 insect-like legs and 2 large claw-like pincers on either side of its body. From behind it came a huge stringer. Drool poured from its mouth, which had a row of fangs sharper than any blade. Additionally, it had black eyes. They were actually staring directly at Naruto and were the darkest black he had ever seen. Scorpion. That was what he was thinking at the time. The scorpion was enormous, nearly 2 stories high. Yes, Shukaku was at least 4 times heavier than the beast before him when he battled Gaara the Ichibi no. The Ichibi, however, did not appear nearly as menacing. It resembled a stuffed raccoon more than anything else. Not to mention that Toad Boss Gamabunta assisted him. As it gazed at Naruto, a series of clinks rumbled from its mouth. Then it lifted its head section, and the air was filled with an ear-splitting shriek. Naruto's fear-induced trance was broken by the shriek, and he put his hands to his ears in a fruitless attempt to drown out the sound that split his head. With his hands still over his ears, Naruto dropped to his knees. It seemed as though someone was using an axe to hack at his head, causing it to split apart. After what felt like an eternity, the scorpion's scream finally came to an end. When Naruto looked up, he saw the stinger of the scorpion thrusting in his direction. The fear gave way to panic. He threw himself to the right, out of the stinger's path, as adrenaline and his training took over. The stinger had stabbed into the spot where Naruto had been only a moment before. The stinger struck the ground, sending chunks of dirt and earth flying into the air. When the beast's claw reached out to seize Naruto, he had no time to relax. Naruto jumped over the claw and clambered to his feet. However, the monster's claw struck again before he could land, sending Naruto sliding across the dirt after slamming into him. His body erupted in pain. He swore that some of his ribs were cracked, if not broken, and the blow's force knocked the air out of his lungs. Naruto had trouble standing up again and getting air back into his lungs. The only thing preventing him from fainting was his adrenaline. As he observed events through his host's eyes, the Kyuubi thought, this really is an interesting turn of events. I may be able to escape sooner than I expected. Just as the scorpion turned and charged at Naruto, he stumbled to his feet. As the monster got closer to Naruto, he asked himself, is this it, am I going to die? Higane Kane was impatiently tapping his foot. In the seemingly endless desert of the wasteland, he was hiding behind one of the dead trees, waiting for his partner to finish his business. Sentu Gakuden, his other partner, was strumming his guitar in silence next to him. They weren't strings, though. His guitar was an odd sight, with what appeared to be tiny lightning bolts extending from one end to the other. A light purple guitar with a jagged, pointed head that resembled something from a Gothic painting or something. His guitar's body resembled a V, but it was more curved, with one side being shorter than the other. That's what it was called, Nevin, a guitar that had been passed down through the generations in his family. Higane's patience with waiting was wearing thin. Sentu stopped playing when Higane yelled, "God damn it! Shisen, hurry the fuck!" Higane's attempt was successful. His blonde-haired teammate emerged from behind the tree a few seconds later, zipping up his pants. Shisen, with his green eyes staring holes in his teammate's head, said, "Damn Higane, can't you let a guy piss in peace?" Higane turned and began to run slowly, responding, "Not when we are supposed to be on patrol." Shisen turned to look at Sentu, perplexed. After strapping his guitar to his back and shrugging his shoulders, Sentu left to follow his team leader. Shisen assumed Higane was simply trying to avoid the sun. He was unable to hold him responsible. Particularly during the day, nobody particularly enjoyed going on patrols. Shisen heard a voice in his head just as he was ready to follow his teammates, which caused him to halt. He knelt down and brought one hand close to his face, putting 3 fingers on his temple. He focused by closing his eyes. It said, "Shisen, can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can hear you, sis, what's up?" It looks like a demon decided to show itself. "Where?" He initially received no response, indicating that she was figuring out the demon's location. His teammates were heading back to their teal-haired teammate after realizing he was not following by this point. "It looks like it is a few miles east of your current position. Your team is the nearest, so Shikyokage Sama wants you to go check it out, and if possible eliminate it." "Right, we're on our way. Oh, can you ask Mom if she could make spaghetti tonight?" "Yeah, whatever, just get going and be careful. This demon may be young, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous." "Got it, we're on our way now, out. Be careful." Wiping the dirt from his pants, Shisen opened his eyes and got to his feet. He saw that his teammates were waiting for the news, right behind him. Shisen looked at Higane and remarked, "Looks like we are on the hunt now." Sentu replied, "Then let's move forward, take the lead." Shisen guided them toward the demon with a node. Every team member was mentally getting ready for what they were going to do. When Naruto made up his mind, the beast was about 30 yards away. As he got to his feet, Naruto thought, "No, I won't die here. Dying would just prove all of the villagers right that he was weak." Naruto was in a state of survival. The hunger and thirst that had afflicted him before were no longer there. He was only aware of the pain in his ribs and his will to live through this encounter. To prevent it from interfering with the task at hand, any other emotion was substituted with numbness. In the seal for his most frequently used jutsu, he brought his hands together. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 15 more Narutos were suddenly standing by his side, prepared for battle. The scorpion kept charging without slowing down. Naruto and his clone divided into groups and ran around the scorpion in various directions. Although it was a straightforward strategy, it had the intended impact. As the groups of Narutos moved from one location to another, the scorpion paused and gazed at them bewildered. Naruto wasted no time in launching a flurry of shuriken at the beast alongside his 3 clones. They discovered that their weapons simply bounced off the demon's exoskeleton like pebbles off a wall, rendering their attack futile. The demon scorpion turned and charged in the direction of the attack. Like the original, the other clones threw their own shuriken at the demon. As he charged at whatever was attacking him, the demon's focus was once again diverted. Naruto was aware that his current style of attack was not sustainable. The hide of the monster was too robust, so he changed it up a little. The real Naruto and his group of clones prepared kunai with explosive tags while the scorpion was busy trying to kill the clones that were bothering him. The clones who had just finished throwing a group of shuriken were attacked by the scorpion, which appeared to have had enough. As it closed in on the 4 clones, it now paid no attention to the other one. The scorpion moved too quickly for the clones to break away. 3 of the 4 clones were sliced through by its claws with a single swipe. The fourth clone managed to jump away from the claw, but it was unable to avoid the scorpion's stinger, which impaled it. The clone vanished in a puff of smoke. The scorpion experienced a moment of bewilderment. Its prey had vanished. However, a series of explosions blasted it back before it could rest. Naruto couldn't see the scorpion because of the smoke and dust that surrounded it. "Did we get it?" one of the clones of Naruto inquired. The original response was, "I fucking hope we did." Naruto is fervently hoping that they killed it or at least pushed it away. However, he knew deep down that their actions had only enraged it. He still hopes for a better result, though, but fate had other ideas. Naruto and his clones were caught off guard as the beast rushed through the smoke. 2 more clones vanished with a swipe of his claw. In an attempt to identify some sort of weakness, Naruto and his clones threw another volley of explosive kunai at the beast. However, his attack only served to aggravate the monster further by kicking up more smoke and dust. The original Naruto was the target of the monster's second charge through the smoke. The beast simply bounced off its apparently impenetrable hide and detonated around Naruto's clone's kunai, which they had thrown to slow it down. The scorpion swung its claws, and Naruto dove to his right, barely avoiding them, except for a single clone that slid beneath the beast. The beast's clone stabbed into the scorpion's underside, where 2 pieces of exoskeleton-like armor were located. The scorpion thrashed around, howling in pain as the kunai exploded, taking the clone with it. 3 more clones were captured and destroyed by its erratic movements. As he came up with a strategy, Naruto thought, its stomach is its weak point. He gathered the rest of his clones. It was not long before the monster recovered. After taking out his tool pouch, the original Naruto gave it to one of his clones. His clones started working as soon as he gave them instructions. By the time the scorpion was recovered and on his way to them, Naruto had brought along 1 clone. As the scorpion drew closer, Naruto gazed at it, but there were drawbacks to these battle laps as well. His blood was beginning to lose its adrenaline. Naruto's awareness of his condition was gradually growing. The effects of a lack of food, water, and energy were beginning to manifest. He couldn't give up just yet, though. He would keep fighting as long as he had any movement at all. That was his ninja style. Even when he fled, his principles followed him. Reaching up to his clone, Naruto dipped his right hand into his almost empty chakra. As his clone wrapped its hands around Naruto's palm, he said, "Okay, let's do this." As the chakra was fed into it until it was complete, a blue sphere started to form. One of the few techniques the 4th Hokage is familiar with is the Rasengan. He rushed at the scorpion without giving it any more thought. In the direction of one another, the creatures persisted in their death charge. The scorpion's stinger rose above its body, ready to strike at any moment, and its claws were poised to rip Naruto to pieces. Naruto's eyes were burning with resolve, and the Rasengan was twirling frantically in his grasp, ready to release its destructive force. With a final roar, the scorpion lunged with its stinger, coming within striking range. When the monster roared, Naruto responded with his own, readied his weapon, and aimed it at the stinger. Rasengan. A battle of strength broke out between the 2 forces. Trying to contain the beast with both hands, Naruto strained under the force of the scorpion's stinger. It was barely able to hold his Rasengan at bay. The clones of Naruto had just completed their task, assembling all of their explosives in the hopes of producing an explosion powerful enough to destroy the scorpion. They head straight to Naruto's original assistant. However, fate decided to mess with Naruto once more before they could get to him. Naruto's Rasengan was penetrated by the scorpion's stinger. His arms were blown apart by his jutsu's failure. Naruto's left arm and shoulder began to hurt before he could react. He had only been slightly hurt by the stinger, which tore through his biceps muscle and skin. However, the agony had only just begun. Stingers were designed to poison a predator's victim. And Naruto experienced precisely that. The amount of poison that did enter him was not as great as it could have been, but it was enough to make him howl in agony and fall to the ground, clutching his injured arm. It seemed as though Naruto's nerves were on fire. Hot lava seemed to be flowing through his body. His mind would register only pain, unlike anything he had ever experienced. With its black eyes fixed on Naruto, the scorpion stepped forward. Its claws snapped its legs, piercing the ground as it walked, and its mouth made clicking noises as its fangs dripped with saliva. It had triumphed, and its victim lay before it, paralyzed by agony. Ready to finish its prey, it raised its stinger once more. Boom! And from underneath it came an explosion, raising its body to a height of nearly 15 feet. The wounded beast landed on its back, thrashing even more wildly than before, and let out another ear. Splitting screech. Its underside armor was pocked with cracks. One of Naruto's clones was holding him up and rescuing him from the blast. He had a terrible burn on his arm. But as he watched the scorpion flail wildly, he gritted his teeth. One of the clones exclaimed, "Fuck, that damn thing still isn't dead." With the original Naruto in hand, the clone said, "What now? We're out of explosive tags." They all remained silent. Running was definitely out of the question because the scorpion would move too quickly and the original Naruto would be greatly slowed down. As the scorpion's thrashing slowed, Naruto turned to face it and tried to stand again. When Naruto noticed the fissure in its armor, he knew what he needed to do. He moved slowly away from the clone holding him up, his left arm burning. Through clenched teeth, he stated, "There's only one way." Once more, Naruto and the other clones prepared a final plan. In front of his final clones, Naruto extended his hand. After that, 4 of the 5 people who were left wrapped their hands around his palm and started feeding their chakra into the original's method. After giving all of their chakra to Naruto, they gradually puffed out of existence one by one. The chakra in Naruto's Rasengan caused his hand to burn, but he endured it. It was his final opportunity. He wasted no time in making one last run with his last clone by his side after the last one vanished. The clone ran ahead of the fallen beast and joined his fingers 10 feet away. He stepped on his clone's hands when the original got to him. Before he vanished, the clone grunted and launched Naruto into the air after channeling his chakra to his muscles. After soaring through the air, Naruto came to a stop and started to descend. Rasengan was spinning in his hand as he faced downward. Adrenaline floods his system one last time, dulling the pain just enough to allow him to concentrate on the task at hand despite the pain shooting through his body. He got close to the scorpion. This was his final opportunity. His fate would be determined by this attack. He hoped that fate would give him a little leeway because failure meant death. He was there, and he brought the deadly spinning orb down onto the monster's weakened and cracked armor with a single last cry. Rasengan. The Rasengan collided with the armor, and the fall's additional momentum accelerated his thrust. The scorpion felt its armor crack and let out another screech. Naruto noticed fresh fissures forming and spreading throughout his abdomen. Then he sensed Rasengan's power ebbing. So he reached into his almost empty chakra reserves again. His jutsu was full of new life. Naruto thought, "Come in, come on," as he ascended to the heavens to take a rest. Finally, Naruto received recognition for his efforts. The Rasengan was able to enter the soft interior when the armor gave way. Everything it touched was ripped apart by the attack. Destroying, tearing, spinning. Naruto's Rasengan transformed everything into a chunky liquid, much like a blender's blades. Blood stained Naruto's clothing and hair as it splattered across his face, arm, and torso. A gurgling sound was all that came out of the scorpion's mouth when it opened to scream. Legs and claws thrashing about. The scorpion stopped flailing after a few more seconds, and like most insects, it curled its legs up to its belly as it died. When Naruto noticed that the scorpion had stopped moving, he stopped the jutsu. He jumped down after he withdrew his hand from the hole in its armor and stumbled to the end of the now dead scorpion's body. Which, given that he was only 10 feet off the ground, turned out to be a bad idea. He stumbled and fell, landing on his injured arm, due to his weakening state. Clinging to his arm, he rolled to his other side and hissed in agony. As he lay there trying to catch his breath, the increasing pain in his arm took it away. Something sizzled and he sat up. The scorpion's corpse emitted smoke. It was charred and blackened where it was still white. Without the fire, it was similar to watching wood burn. Its claw ends started to gradually flake off. Naruto hurried to his feet and ran as fast as his wounded body would allow. He had no intention of staying to see what would happen. He had no doubt that it would return, only more powerful. As long as it wasn't here, he ran, even though he had no idea where he was going. As he gazed out from the walls of his village toward the horizon, his old fingers stung his bead, and the sun behind him painted the sky a variety of reds, pinks, and oranges. With the eldest standing at his right and the second eldest sitting at the edge of the wall with his head resting on his left hand and his elbows resting on his thighs, the children were by his sides, gazing out over the landscape. With her head resting on her knees and her legs pulled to her chest, his daughter sat beside her brother. The Shikyokuge said, "Ryu, Kenpachi, I want you to go out and search." Always eager to serve his father and leader, Ryu asked, "Hi Sama, where do you want us to look?" The Shikyokuge raised his hand and gestured directly in front of him. "Just keep move straight, do not change direction." Ryu walked to the edge after nodding. He left the tall walls behind. He placed his right hand and feet against the slowing of his descent after channeling chakra to them. Ken was still on the wall. Then Yuga told her brother, Ken Otto.San said to go. Ken let out a grunt. Why'd I have to go? I'm tired and Ryu is more than capable of searching on his own, Ken replied. Yuga surveyed her surroundings, searching for something with which to hit her brother. A portion of the wall next to her had enough cracks in it to allow a chuck to be removed. She seized it and yanked it away. Her brother was thrown over the edge when she raised the rock and struck the back of his head. The Shikyokage shook his head and squeezed the bridge of his nose. Why were they unable to settle their disputes in a different way? Like his brother, Ken was able to right himself in the middle of the fall and slow down by channeling chakra to his left hand and feet. He was gripping the back of his head with his right hand. He withdrew his hand to check, saying, yeah, I'm bleeding. Damn, one of these days she's going to give me brain damage or something. After reaching the bottom of everything, Ken and his brother ventured out into the chilly wasteland. 2 hours later Higane surveyed his surroundings. He could hardly see in the night's darkness. Though they were having similar difficulties seeing through the night as he was. Shisen and Sentu were also scanning their surroundings. Sentu called out, hey, I think I found him, to get the other members of his team's attention. Shisen and Hagin approach him to see what he has discovered. It was a boy. He appeared no more than 11 years old. In addition to a few cuts and bruises, he was covered in dust and dirt. Sentu reached down to feel for his pulse, but it was absent. He had passed away. After delivering the sobering news, Sentu shook his head and turned to face his teammates. Hagin knelt down and walked to the body. He turned to put the boy on his back and said, put him on my back. Shisen started to head toward the village, saying, I don't get it, we were the only one in this section. Who could have done this? Standing, Hagin repositioned the body on his back, and jogged up to join Sentu, his teammate. As he began a light run, Hagin said softly, don't know. But right now let's get back home. His family would want to give him a proper burial. His teammates followed, all of them wondering how this had happened. Not succeeding it was a thing that nobody liked. Usually, it makes no difference what a person failed at. Most of the time, failure feels the same way. However, some failures are more painful than most people realize. When faced with failure, people experience and respond differently. It feels like a crushing weight on one's shoulders and like numbness that spreads throughout one's body. However, failing a task is one thing. Failing a person is quite another. A person's feelings are 10 times more intense when they are let down. The devastating feeling is exacerbated when you fail someone who is depending on you. As they made their way back to the village, those who knew Naruto were experiencing that. The team had set out to find Hinata and, ideally, Naruto when she had not yet returned from her search. However, she was by herself when they discovered her. She had a backpack in her arms, her face buried in her hands, and she was sobbing all over. They realized then that Naruto had escaped. At first, nobody did anything but watch the young heiress weep with heartbreak. Kurenai was the first to get up and walk toward her pupil. She knelt down and touched Hinata's back when she got to her. Hinata clung to her teacher as if she were her last remaining lifeline as soon as Kurenai's hand touched her student's back. Kakashi observed Kurenai trying to console her sobbing pupil with consoling words and gestures. But they didn't seem to have much of an impact. He moved forward over the sopping wet ground. Kurenai's eyes were sad as she gazed at Kakashi. As Kunai nodded in agreement, Kakashi said, we should return to the village. This mission is a failure. Suza hurried forward as soon as she heard that. In what Kakashi could see was a desperate statement, Suza said, but Hitaki. Sama, we can't just return empty-handed. The target is still out there. We can't continue. Naruto has probably made it across the border by now, replied Kakashi. Then we should follow him across it. We cannot allow the demon to fall into enemy hands. A few of the team's more senior members let out a gasp. Kiba and Shino were the only ones who were perplexed. Hinata's own sobs and the sound of the rain drowned out everything else. Kiba looked at his sobbing teammate again and asked, Demon? Are they talking about Naruto? Sure, he was a pain in the neck, but isn't calling him a demon a bit harsh? Kakashi tried to calm himself by closing his eye and inhaling deeply through the opening in his mask. It's really risky to speak in such a way in front of children who shouldn't be around. Kakashi attempted to reason with Root Ninja once more. If we attempt to cross the border, we will most likely get caught because of our numbers. If we cross and we are caught, grass might see that as an act of war. And that is something that we cannot afford. Then allow me and my team to continue this hunt alone. We will be able to find the target, Suza responded. It had never happened before, but now Kakashi was beginning to lose patience. However, it made sense considering the circumstances, the weather, his weariness, and the obstinate ninja undermining his authority. Kakashi inhaled deeply to regain his composure before losing it. As Kakashi said, "You are not going after Naruto. The risk greatly outweighs the reward." He was overcome with guilt. In essence, he was stating that Naruto was not worth the danger. Kakashi turned toward the village and gestured for everyone to leave, concluding, "My decision stands, we are returning to the village." Suza became enraged. The one-eyed man was leaving her, and she had to fight the urge to kill him. However, she was aware that she would not be able to return to the village. Furthermore, simply taking off was not an option. Being rude, a seal put on their head during recruitment would activate, killing her and her team when Konoha made them missing ninja. When Suza looked up, she saw that everyone except her team had begun their journey home. Ryushi approached her side. Ryushi asks, "What should we do now?" For a moment, Suza kept quiet as he tried to come up with a strategy. Suza walked toward the others and said, "There is nothing we can do but return to the village, and hope that Danzo-sama will be merciful." Ryushi gave Kimono a somewhat dreaded glance. He could see that there would be dire repercussions if he returned empty-handed. Ryushi jerked his head in Sosa's direction, directing him to follow. They were powerless to stop it. It was chilly at night. The cold was the least of his concerns at the moment, but it pierced his body deeply. He was walking with increasingly slow steps. The only thing keeping him going was adrenaline, but that had worn off a few hours ago. There was nothing he could do to soothe the burning sensation on his arm. Only enough of his chakra remained to prevent him from dying of depletion. He was reminded of the experience from a few hours ago by the dried blood on him. The demon thought, "Yes, just a little while longer. I can almost taste the freedom." Naruto went to his knees after losing his footing. His body could no longer be supported by his legs. He began to tremble slowly. He trembled until a sensation arose in his throat. He spat it out when it got to his mouth. The liquid splashed onto the ground. He could tell what it was by the taste. Throughout his life, he had tasted it numerous times. Blood. Naruto surmised that the poison was at last beginning to work. Naruto thought to himself, "Hey, I guess the fox won't heal me this time." Raising his head, Naruto surveyed his surroundings. Empty. Lifeless. Dead. Nothing was present. A chuckle escaped his lips. His laughter grew louder over time, gradually intensifying into full-fledged laughter. He kept laughing. Naruto raised his head and gazed at the heavens. In return, the stars gazed at him. "Are you satisfied?" he yelled to the sky. "Was my life screwed up enough for you? Was God? Or Buddha, or whoever the hell is up there?" Naruto kept yelling up at the sky. He was cursing all the gods in his mind, accusing them of causing his misery. He swore and screamed until he was unable to continue. His arms prevented him from plunging into the dirt as he fell forward. Ryu gazed at the arid landscape. From atop one of the dead trees that filled the wastes, he peered over the horizon, in search of anything that could be the item he and his brother were trying to find. At the base of the tree, his brother was leaning against the long, dead tree with his arms folded. "Do you even know what we're supposed to be looking for?" his brother yelled. "Hey Ryu." Ryu paused his search for a moment. Come to think of it, I don't know what we are looking for." "I don't know, Ken." Ken let out a sigh. Perhaps before venturing into the wastes, they ought to have asked their father for more information. Ken yawned to demonstrate his point, saying, "Hey, let's head back. We've been searching for more than an hour and a half. I'm tired and I want to go to sleep." Ignoring his brother's grumblings, Ryu looked back at the landscape. He didn't want to go back without anything. Whatever it was that his father was looking for, he was determined to find it. Ken persisted in whining, but Ryu ignored him. He then heard a sound. "Ken, do you hear that?" Ken paused his whining to pay attention. Sand and dirt shifted as the wind blew around them. It was just the wind, and Ken was about to tell his older brother. Then he heard it. Ken shut his eyes and concentrated on his ears. Ryu opened his eyes and Ken said, "Sounds like someone shouting." Next to his brother, Ryu leapt from the tree. Ryu said, "Come on," and they both left, moving in the direction of the noise. With a shaky push, Naruto sat with his legs extended in front of him. His arm was burning, his mouth was dry, and his muscles hurt. His shoulder and a portion of his chest were also burning, in addition to his arm. Naruto began to lose his vision. Breathing was becoming more difficult. It was this. Naruto predicted that the poison would ultimately kill him in 10 minutes. Naruto started to consider everything he hadn't done. "I never became Hokage. I guess the villagers are right, someone like me could never be Hokage. There were still so many promises that I didn't keep. I never changed the Hyuga clan. I told Neji I would change the clan when I became Hokage. Looks like I was just full of talk. Maybe Hinata will be able to change the clan, she is the next clan head after all. When Naruto recalled the last time he had seen Hinata, his heart tightened. She begged him not to tell him that he was loved by others. However, she was unable to respond when he asked who it was. Why didn't she? Although she did not provide their names, she asserted that there were people. He had stated that if she had mentioned someone's name, he would have come back. Hinata should have declared her love for him if she wanted him to come back. Naruto, however, was aware that she didn't love him. She must have been afraid of him because she was unable to communicate with him effectively. And whenever she gets close to him, she always faints. Her face would flush as if she were feeling ill from his presence. However, it would never work even if she did love him by some odd chance. It wasn't like the monster finds someone who accepts him for who he is in the stories he reads. No, monsters are not supposed to be happy in this world. Breathing was becoming very difficult. Naruto simply thought about lying down and passing away, but his attention was drawn to the sound of footsteps. He could just make out the shapes of what appeared to be two people when he looked up. They were on their way to him. He laughed, the beast inside him. Naruto was informed by the Kyuubi that, it appears they are coming to finish the job the monster could not boy. Naruto would have disregarded the Kyuubi at any other moment. However, he believed him because of his mental state. Naruto rolled over and attempted to get to his feet. But his body just wouldn't stand, so he couldn't. Naruto then attempted to crawl away. A pitiful attempt to get away. When Naruto noticed one of the figures, a boy, about 3 feet ahead of him, he had already traveled about 4 feet. Naruto allowed himself to fall apart. He hissed in pain as he landed on his injured arm, which was flaming with pain. The figure in front of Naruto approached him slowly as he watched. It seemed to Naruto that this was the end. However, Naruto refused to surrender easily. Drawing one of the blades from his kunai pouch, he did so. Before him, the figure held up his hands. Just behind him, Naruto heard the second person kneel. With the kunai in his hand, Naruto swung at the unidentified individual as quickly as his wounded body would allow. The person grabbed Naruto's hand, but he had hoped to do some harm. A soothing voice told him, "Calm down. We're here to help you." The voice seemed to reassure Naruto in some way, and he let his arm go limp. The Kyuubi thinks, what's going on? Who are these people? They could ruin everything. The Kyuubi decided to keep quiet and hope that he didn't do anything that would prevent his escape because he knew that if he tried to do anything, he might lose his chance at freedom. Ryu told his brother, Ken, he's poisoned. He's hurt bad, and it looks like it's spread pretty far. Ken took a syringe out of the pouch on his belt and said, I got an anti-venom shot, which will slow the poison and get rid of some of it. But we need to get him home and fast. Naruto watched as the man he now recognized, Ken, took the syringe, inserted the needle into his chest, pushed it in, and gave him an anti-venom injection. No! Yelled the Kyuubi, as he tried to stop the intruders by releasing a wave of chakra. The boy in front of Ryu sent out a wave of evil chakra. Ryu yelled, Raryukami, in his head. Hi, a voice said in response. Then, as a pale, nearly white chakra poured from Naruto's arm, Ryu put his hand on his abdomen. The white chakra collided with the Kyuubi's red chakra, overpowering it and cancelling it out. The ease with which his chakra was overpowered shocked the Kyuubi. This human had extraordinary strength, or it was something else entirely. Ken looked at Naruto in awe and said, Whoa, what was that? I don't know, but the anti-venom won't last forever. We need to head back now. Help me put him on my back. Ryu puts Naruto on his back with Ken's assistance. They fled back to the village once he was reasonably safe. In case his passenger fell off, Ken remained behind Ryu. They travel quickly enough to arrive home in roughly half an hour. They didn't want to hurt the boy anymore, but they could arrive sooner. It was hoped that they would return to the village before things deteriorated. Eyelids were heavy and difficult to open. His eyes seemed to weigh several thousand pounds each. There seemed to be something inside his head using a sledgehammer to pound his head wildly. He struggled to open his eyes for a few moments before he was able to do so, but the sudden burst of light made him quickly close them while moaning in pain. Though he hardly had the strength to move his hand, let alone his entire arm, he attempted to reach to cover his eyes. He opened his eyes once more. He let out another moan as the light attacked his vision once more. To his right a voice said, Sasuke-kun, you're awake. To say it sounded good would be an understatement, perhaps, shrieked, would be a better way to put it. Sasuke was only aware that the voice was causing his head to seem to be breaking apart. Then Sasuke sensed something clinging to his chest. which caused him to hiss as pain shot through his body. He was relieved when the weight instantly fell off of him. The voice said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Sasuke-kun. I didn't mean to hurt you. Are you okay?" Sasuke took a few moments to recognize the person. Why wasn't he surprised? Sakura? Sakura would be there, of course. Hold on a minute. The presence of Sakura beside him could only indicate one thing. He had returned to Konoha. In fact, the Dobi brought him back. Sasuke made an effort to recall Naruto's actions that resulted in his defeat. However, his head ached more the more he tried to recall. That was the only thought that occurred to me. Red. The only thing he remembered was that. Sasuke's throat felt like sandpaper, so he asked, Sakura, what happened? Sakura whispered back to him, "Well, that idiot Naruto brought you back. He hurt you pretty bad too. He broke your arms and legs. He almost killed you." Sasuke paused to reflect. According to Sasuke, where is Naruto? Sakura said nothing. Naruto had departed, she had heard. She was initially thrilled that she could now devote all of her attention to Sasuke since Naruto was no longer persistently asking her out on dates. Sakura was not the only person who was relieved that Naruto was gone. When they learned that Naruto had left the village, it was a hive of activity. Like wildfire, word of Naruto's desertion spread throughout the village. Out in the rain, which had not yet stopped, ninja and civilians alike celebrated, but that was the last thing on their minds. Although Sakura was relieved that Naruto was no longer there, she thought the celebrations were a little excessive. The villagers' behavior gave the impression that Naruto was a curse or plague that had been lifted. She then noticed Hinata. Sakura had no idea that a team had been dispatched to try to retrieve Naruto, much less that Hinata was among those who went in search of him. When Sakura saw her sensei's team, she had gone to buy some fresh flowers for Sasuke's room. She noticed Hinata from beneath her umbrella, and her distaste for Naruto vanished after seeing what she did. With the help of her sensei, Hinata was making her way home. She didn't seem to care that she was drenched. She could tell she had been crying because her eyes were puffy and red. Sakura could hear Hinata over the sound of the rain, but she could see her lips moving. Then she remembered everything that the villagers had done to him. She had heard abuse in addition to the constant insults. Once, she had heard some ninjas discussing terrible things they had done to him, but now, when she looked at Naruto, she would see the harm the elder ninjas had allegedly caused. She then recalled everything she had done to Naruto. There were moments when she was certain that she had broken some of his bones, but the following day, or occasionally later that day, there were no traces of her former hen, which made her wonder if she had somehow contributed to Naruto's departure. Sakura. Where is he? She was startled out of her reverie by Sasuke's voice. She turned back to face him, attempting to come up with something to say to him. However, the truth kept returning to her thoughts. Before responding, Sakura inhaled deeply. Naruto. He's gone, Sasuke-kun. What? He's gone, Sasuke-kun. He left the village. They sent a team to get him, but they couldn't. Sasuke could not speak. Naruto went out of town. Why? Sasuke heard Naruto's incessant yapping about becoming Hokage and always saw a smile on his face. Sasuke slowly clenched his fist, the bandages around his hand discolored from the strain, and he made his promise. Naruto was unable to leave. Something must have given him strength if Naruto was able to defeat him. Sasuke lost despite Orochimaru's training. What knowledge did Naruto gain that allowed him to overcome him? He must be aware. He had returned, as Naruto had promised. Sasuke made his own vow while lying broken in his hospital bed. Naruto. I'll find you and bring you back. I just hope that it doesn't take a year to do it, I promise. While she and her father waited for her brothers to return, Yuga was contentedly conversing with Tayuya. 2 days prior, Tayuya had been discharged from the hospital and was residing in a rehabilitation facility while all of her documentation was completed. Although it was a little hot during the day and chilly at night, Tayuya had to admit that the wasteland wasn't all that horrible. She relished the sense of independence she had. She had never experienced freedom since Orochimaru arrived and put that damned seal on her shoulder. But now that it was gone, she had a fresh start, an opportunity to begin anew. She had a new home and friends. Getting out of bed, she put on her sandals. She chose to start by looking at the wall, where she was currently conversing with Yuga. Tayuya simply sat next to Yuga and listened, or pretended to listen when she wasn't interested in the subject, while Yuga spoke for the most part. Yuga inquired, so you want to come to the spot tonight? For the majority of the ninjas in the village, the location served as their primary hangout. It is where almost everyone goes to relax. The Gakuden family, who are musicians who can play almost any instrument in the world, owns it. Almost every night, The Saro Gakuden children performed the music. Though they were skilled in many other genres, it only mattered on the occasion. They typically played what they call rock and metal. I don't know. In an attempt to entice a friend to accompany her, Yuga exclaimed. Ah, come on. It'll be fun. Yuga prods Tayuya with her elbow, saying, I'm sure Basu would really like having you there. When Tayuya shoved Yuga, she blushed and the nudges stopped. Tayuya got up and said, whatever. She was careful to watch her language around the Shikyokage and said, going to get some shut-eye. See y'all later. Bye. Yuga and her father were left alone after Tayuya left. Yuga shivered as a chill wind blew. He gazed down at his daughter, the Shikyokage. Placing his white Shikyokage coat on her shoulders, he took it off. Yuga wrapped the coat around herself to better protect herself from the cold as she grinned and looked up into her father's face. With concern in her voice, Yuga asked her father, do you think Ryu and Ken are alright? The Shikyokage lifted his hand to stroke his beard and reassured his daughter, you don't have to worry. I would not have sent them out if I knew they would not be able to handle it. He was correct, Yuga said, nodding to herself. Ryu and Ken were strong enough to care for themselves. Ryu in particular had incredible physical strength. He was Hercules incarnate, according to some of the village's ninjas. Whoever it was. Yuga heard her father say, they're back. Yuga gazed across the desert. She didn't notice them going to the wall for a moment. She noticed someone on Ryu's back as they approached. Ryu took Naruto off his back and held him in a safer position as he and Kenpachi leapt up the enormous wall once they had arrived at its base. Naruto was placed gently on the ground as they arrived at the top of the wall, where their father and sister were. We found him out a few miles from the village. He has been poisoned. This should hold at least for another few minutes. Ken told his dad. Yuga gave Naruto a downward glance. She was concerned. His breathing appeared labored, his arm wound appeared infected, and he was covered in dried blood. The vision of Naruto swam. He could hardly see what he was looking at. He could make out what appeared to be a giant. It squatted beside him. As he tried to move in a panic, Naruto's strength finally failed him, leaving him defenseless. The Shikyokage extended his hand in Naruto's direction. Naruto's eyes were closed. However, he felt a hand on his forehead rather than a blow. Opening his eyes, Naruto turned to face the big man above him. Repeating the words from his dream, the Shikyokage lifted Naruto into his arms with caution so as not to hurt him anymore and headed for the hospital, saying, it is all right. You're safe now. His kids are right behind him. There was nothing Naruto could do but follow the man wherever he was taking him. However, Naruto experienced a sense of security that he had never experienced in Konoha. Naruto felt the weight of his eyelids increase until he passed out. You're home now. As it moved down his throat, the amber-colored liquid burned. A momentary diversion was provided by the fire water that trickled down his throat. He didn't drink normally, but at the moment, he didn't give a damn. He tried to put his shot cup on his ever-expanding pyramid of cups after the alcohol had settled in his stomach. At the moment, he was attempting to complete the third row, which would bring his total number of cups to 3. Bringing his total to 12 now. The bartender was using plastic because all of his glass had been destroyed in the glass incident. The light bulbs blew, so candles were placed throughout the bar. The rain was kept out by wood covering the windows. The man's eyes struggled to focus on anything, and his normally tan face was flushed. The bar's doors opened, and the man who many believed to be the village's strongest jonin entered from the rain. Kakashi Hitaki, the White Fang's son. He looked around the crowded, noisy bar. The celebration of Naruto's departure was still going on. He noticed an open stool next to the man who was attempting to place his glass on his pyramid without tipping it over. He arrived at the stool, sat down, and looked at the man beside him, who was visibly wasted. Kakashi was asked by the bartender, so what'll it be, son? Kakashi's gaze shifted to the barman. He was an elderly man. Most likely in his mid-50s, however, he appeared to be in good health. All he had to do was flex his collared shirt, which appeared to be ready to tear at any second. His hair, combed back, was white, whatever color it had been when he was younger. He had a beard, but it wasn't very thick. From beneath his right eye, a scar extended down his cheek, neck, and into his shirt. From his left temple, another scar extended into his hair above his ear. As a ninja, the man must have witnessed more battles than his fair share. Give me the strongest stuff you got. As he went to fetch Kakashi's drink, the bartender said angrily, no way, kid. You look like you'll drink yourself under the table. You get scotch. Kakashi chose not to argue. All he wanted was a drink. It had been nearly 10 hours since he had returned to the village. He reported his failure to Tsunade after spending 3 hours in the Hokage Tower. The Hokage, of course, was not pleased with the news and proceeded to devour her sake. That gave Kakashi the all clear to depart. After only an hour or so of the meeting, he ran into the village council, who insisted that he give them another version of his report. For the next 2 hours, Kakashi recounted his mission and responded to the council's inquiries, primarily the numerous ones from Danzo. He was then permitted to depart. His apartment was in disarray when he arrived home. His window was broken, and the rain was still coming in. He came to the kunai with chain to unravel after clearing away all the glass, covering the window, and discarding everything that the rain had damaged. Fortunately, his valuable Icha collection was undamaged. Without looking at the man beside him, Kakashi questioned, "Don't you think that you've had enough, Iruka?" Iruka lost his concentration and failed to place his cup, causing his hand to collide with the other cups and toppling his unfinished pyramid. Iruka swore, "Damn it." After returning, the bartender set a cup in front of Kakashi. The bartender said to Kakashi, "There you go, sorry if it don't go down as smoothly as it should." Kakashi brought the cup to the hole in his mask and asked, "Why wouldn't it?" As if it were no big deal, the bartender wiped a cup with a dish towel and said, "I don't know if I got all the glass out of my booze." When the cup came to his lips, Kakashi stopped, pondering whether he ought to sip his drink. He eventually raised the cup to his lips and drank it all. It warmed him up a little, but he didn't mind the burn. "So you're Sakumo's kid, right?" Kakashi gave the bartender a look. "How would you know? I used to know your father, we were pretty good friends. We used to make quite a team." "Shame what happened to him," the bartender said to Jonin. Iruka told the bartender, "Barkeep, get me another." His speech seemed to be the only thing unimpaired by his intoxication. "No way, kid. I shouldn't have given you as much as I did in the first place. I think you've had enough," Iruka was told by the bartender. Iruka slammed his fist against the bar and yelled, "I'll tell you when I've had enough." This caused everyone in the bar to pause what they were doing and turn to face him. Kakashi was somewhat taken aback. He had never seen Iruka so furious. He must be really struggling with Naruto's departure. Naruto was like a younger brother to Iruka, possibly even a son, and he was gone, so Kakashi couldn't really blame him. The bartender calmly said to Iruka, "Iruka, you've had enough. Go home and get some sleep, you need it." Iruka responded, visibly upset that he was not receiving another drink. "What I need is another drink." Kakashi attempted to talk sense into his head by saying, "Iruka, calm down. He's right. You've had enough." Iruka abruptly yelled, "Stay out of this, Hitaki," to Kakashi's surprise. The bartender warned Iruka, "I'm going to have to throw you out if you don't calm down and leave." Iruka simply gazed at the bartender, seemingly challenging him to eject him. Suddenly, two individuals grabbed Iruka's arms and pinned him face down on the bar after the bartender snapped his finger. As he fought to break free from the people holding him down, Iruka swore. Nobody, not even Kakashi, attempted to stop what was happening. Around the bar, the bartender moved. He took off his waist and kunai pouches when he arrived in Iruka because a drunk ninja was dangerous and the bartender didn't want to see one again. He nodded to his two bouncers to let Iruka go once he was certain he had no more weapons on him. The bartender grabbed Iruka, put him in a chokehold, and began dragging him toward the door before he could strike back. Iruka fought valiantly against the bartender's hold the entire time. Despite his advanced age, the bartender's strength allowed him to easily drag Iruka toward the door as though he weighed no more than a child. Even though the rain was not as heavy as it had been at the beginning, Shazun questioned whether it would ever stop. With an umbrella to protect her from the rain, she strolled through the deserted village streets. Due to the rain, very few people went outside these days, and those who did only did so when absolutely necessary. Both the Hokage and Kakashi were devastated when she returned to Konoha and broke the bad news to them. Shazun attempted to console her mentor after Tsunade began drinking after Kakashi left the office, but she was met with threats and a glare. Tsunade finally threw her out of the office after attempting to curtail, if not completely stop, her mentor's drinking for approximately 30 minutes. To divert her attention, Shazun made the decision to finish some work. She was disappointed by how quickly time seemed to pass. In fact, the work succeeded in diverting her attention. Now, despite her best efforts, her thoughts kept coming back to Naruto. Her umbrella, her heels clicking on the damp ground, and the sound of the rain hitting the ground. Her ears were filled only with those sounds. She was coming from a bar when she heard shouting, which attracted her attention. Curiosity got the better of her, and she halted her journey home. A moment later, the bar's doors flew open, and someone rushed out. He thudded to the ground, splattering water everywhere. A big man shouted at the man who had been downed, "And don't come back till you get your damn head cleared, boy," before going back inside. Shazun saw the man moan, struggle to stand, and then fall back down. Shazun walked over to the man. She knelt down and attempted to assist him when she got to him. As she assisted the inebriated man, she inquired, "Are you all right?" Shazun assisted the man in standing up. He relied on her to maintain his balance, demonstrating that he was obviously unable to stand on his own. She attempted to identify this man through the darkness. As he attempted to regain his balance, the man answered, "I'm fine." The voice was familiar to Shazun. In an attempt to confirm that it was him, Shazun said, "Iruka-san? Is that you?" Iruka tried to look Shazun in the eyes by raising his gaze. He was unable to concentrate on anything. Iruka whispered, "Shazun-san," in an attempt to focus his eyes. With her umbrella now lying forgotten beside her, Shazun wrapped Iruka's arm around her neck. She put her right arm around Iruka's waist and used her left hand to hold onto his left wrist. Since Shazun didn't know where Iruka lived, she led her to her apartment and said, "Come on, we need to get you out of the rain." As they ascended the stairs to Iruka's apartment, Shazun fought with her. Iruka continued to mutter about Naruto while they were both soaked, claiming that things would have gone differently if he had simply gotten to know Naruto sooner. They gradually ascended the last step and arrived at Shazun's door. Iruka's arm slipped from her shoulders, but Shazun didn't notice and released her hand to retrieve her keys from her pocket. Something touched her butt before she had a chance to remove her keys from her pocket. Shazun's eyes widened as she turned to face Iruka, only to discover that her hand had disappeared. A flush began to appear on her face. She was about to chastise Iruka for his twisted behavior when she turned to face him, but her words were cut short when she saw his face. He had no emotion on his face, his lips were slightly parted, and his eyes were half closed. He obviously had no idea what his hand was resting on at the moment. Her focus swiftly shifted back to opening her door. As soon as the door opened, she hurriedly put her keys back in her pocket, put Iruka's hand back on her shoulder, and ushered him inside before using her foot to shut the door. Everybody in the village had boarded up the windows of their apartments, including hers. She had submitted a glass trade request to Suna. Although it would be expensive for the village, it was essential. She guided Iruka to a chair in the dining room and assisted her in sitting down. She went into her kitchen to light some candles when she was certain he wouldn't fall off. She knew her house well enough to avoid running into anything, but it was nice to see Iruka there. After lighting the candles, she went back to her dining table and put one in the middle before going to her hallway towel closet. She snatched up a towel and hurried to her room. As soon as she could, she dried herself off and took off her damp clothes. She changed into an oversized shirt and some dry short shorts after drying herself off. When Shazun came back, he discovered Iruka where she had left him. Iruka gazed at the candle's tiny flame as it danced before him. Iruka walked beside Shazun. He looked like a man who had lost everything. When Shazun realized she had nothing to say, she shut her mouth after opening it to speak. She tried a couple more times before deciding that his health came first. "Iruka-san, you need to get out of those wet clothes or you get sick." There was silence when she spoke. She made another attempt, "Iruka-san?" Iruka did not respond once more. All he could look at was the candle. Shazun's patience was wearing thin. She started to say something else, but Iruka spoke first. In a whisper, Iruka said, "It's my fault." "What?" "It's my fault that he left." Shazun was aware of what he was discussing now. Shazun took a seat in the adjacent chair. "Iruka-san, it's not your fault." Iruka yelled, "Like hell it isn't," startling the medical ninja. "When my parents died I was alone, sad, angry. When I first learned that Naruto was the container of the fox I hated him," Iruka said while staring at his hands. "I saw him as the monster that took my parents, not as the hungry and sad little boy that he was. I even joined in when they stoned him, beat him. I even joined the villagers that went out to look for him and kill him." Shazun let out a gasp. Iruka was a nice, compassionate person during the brief time she knew him. She was shocked to hear that he detested Naruto as well. Shazun turned back to Iruka, who sniffed. "But then one day I found him just after some villagers had finished beating him. When they left I say it my chance for revenge." Tears started to fall from Iruka's eyes, but when I saw him there I didn't see a monster. I saw a little boy, beaten bloody, barely breathing. Tears were falling freely now as Iruka continued. "It was then that I told myself that I would treat him with the respect he deserved. I told myself that I would try to make it up to him. Now when it really mattered I did nothing. I never told him I was sorry." By the time Iruka was done, Shazun's own tears were streaming down her face. Silence fell. Shazun then slowly reached out and took Iruka's hands in her own. Iruka turned slowly to face the woman on his right. "Iruka, It's not your fault Naruto left. You're wrong. I was one of the people who hurt him. But you did something that many of them didn't. Iruka gave her a perplexed look. He was unable to understand her meaning. Shazun chose to respond to him. You change. You may have seen Naruto as a monster, you may have hurt him, but you changed. You tried to make right the mistakes you made, which is more than what can be said for most of the village, Shazun said. Iruka was at a loss for words. Iruka's head began to ache before he could come up with anything to say. As Shazun closed his eyes in agony, he took one of his hands out of his and held it to his head. As she helped him stand and guided him to the bathroom, taking a towel from the towel closet along the way, Shazun said, "The alcohol is starting to get to you. Come on, we need to get you dry so you won't get sick." Iruka shut the bathroom door and Shazun said, "Here, dry yourself off. I'll try to find you something to wear." Iruka began removing his damp clothes slowly. Fortunately, his boxers weren't soaked. Shazun knocked on the door after Iruka had finished drying himself. He moved to the door and opened it, using the wall as support. Shazun looked at him and flushed. Fortunately, when he opened the door, he was still in his boxers. Shazun stumbled a little as she handed him the clothes, saying, "H. Here, this is the biggest clothes I have. H, hopefully they'll fit you." Iruka stole the garments. "Your boyfriend's?" Before heading to the specified room, Shazun informed him, "No, I don't have one, they're mine. I like clothes that are too big for me. Come back to the living room when you're done." Iruka dressed without bothering to close the door. The clothing barely fit him. On Shazun, he assumed they were larger. He used the wall as support as he staggered out of the restroom. Shazun was waiting for him on her couch when he reached the end of the hall. Iruka's head erupted once more, his headache growing more intense by the second. He moved cautiously through the low light toward the couch. Iruka staggered toward Shazun, who watched with mild amusement. She made the decision to compromise with him. After assisting him to the couch, she took a seat. "Lay down," she told him. Iruka nearly collapsed onto the sofa. He then dropped to his knees and rested his head on Shazun's lap. Shazun reddened again. He could have laid down on her large couch instead of on her. Iruka asked, his brows displaying pain, "Now what?" As her hands turned green, Shazun told him, "Jay, just relax." Iruka felt the pain in his head instantly subside as she put her hands on it. Iruka closed his eyes and sighed, relishing the sense of relief that Shazun's touch provided. He was happy for a while. Shazun's touch was all he felt. As Shazun massaged his head, all of his problems and anxieties simply vanished, as did his headache. Shazun made an effort to concentrate on the current task, pun intended. It was easy to treat a simple headache because she has treated patients in much worse conditions. However, Iruka's little groans and sighs were a little annoying. In addition, she was the source of the groans, which made her blush a little more. Shazun acknowledged to herself that Iruka was quite attractive after glancing at her face. She had never really had a chance to look at him before, but now she realizes how attractive he is. 10 minutes or so later, she allowed the glow in her hands to fade until it was gone. She was certain she had given Iruka his headache back. In the morning, she would have to deal with his hangover, but she would deal with it when it happened. He reached up and grabbed her hand just as she was ready to remove Iruka's head from her lap so she could get some rest. With his eyes still closed, Iruka whispered, "Don't go. I don't want to disturb you. You'll be much more comfortable when." Iruka brought her hand down and nuzzled it with his cheek, interrupting Shazun's speech. Shazun was unsure of what drove Iruka to act in that way, but she surmised that it might have been the alcohol still in his system. Iruka whispered once more, opening his eyes to meet hers, "I'm comfortable with you here, your presence is soothing." Iruka begged, "Please. I don't want to be alone." Shazun noticed the entreaty in his eyes. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Iruka closed his eyes and grinned before swiftly going back to sleep. Shazun stayed up a few minutes longer. Iruka's hair was being caressed absently by her unheld hand. She ran her fingers lightly through his brown hair. She started to slowly fall asleep. She closed her eyes and rested her head back on the couch. And these two wounded souls found solace in each other for this one night at least. As they awaited their punishment, the three of them were kneeling with their heads touching the ground. They went straight to Root HQ after they got back to the village. Danzo, their master, was a very scary man. He never displayed his anger in the manner that most people do. He demonstrated his anger by his behavior. Danzo was currently focusing on the 3 ninjas in front of him. In addition to not killing the 9 tails, they had returned from their mission without it. Danzo was not happy, and when he was unhappy, people suffered. Danzo sat in a chair that resembled a throne in the main rooms of his secret base and said, tell me again why you did not decide to chase the demon across the border. Suza spoke without raising her head. Danzo. Sama, Hitaki-san had made it clear that we were to return to the village. We were only following orders. Danzo said nothing. Then he rose and approached his 3 ninjas slowly. Danzo said calmly, tell me Suza, is Kakashi Hitaki a root ninja? But Danzo. Sama. Suza was interrupted by Danzo, who asked, is he a root ninja? Fear clamped its icy fingers around Sosa's heart and she replied, no. Danzo stopped in front of the 3 bowed ninjas and asked, are Kakashi Hitaki's orders carry more importance than mine? No Danzo. Sama. Suza replied once more, do you know what the penalty is for failure? Yes, but Danzo. Some if you give us on more chance I'm Sue. Once more, Danzo interrupted, saying, failure is no tolerated at all. Suza was afraid for her teammates as well as for herself. She loves her teammates despite the way she was brought up and trained. They resembled her family. Though she knew it would not help, Suza pleaded, please Danzo. Sama, I beg your mercy. Nobody ever got that luxury from Danzo. They caught Danzo's attention. Each one is examined by his single working eyes. Very well Suza. I will grant your team mercy. Suza was shocked by what she heard. Did she hear correctly? Was he truly being kind to them? She heard a snap just as she was about to thank Danzo. One of Danzo's ninja materialized in front of him, kneeling respectfully as he snapped his fingers. The ninja removed his katana from its sheath and put it in his master's hand after Danzo extended his hand. The blade was in front of Danzo. Slowly, Suza lifted her head to gaze at her master. Then Danzo moved the blade around until he had it in a reverse grip. He lifted the blade and lowered it. As she waited for the blade to pierce her flesh, Suza closed her eyes. The blade, however, pierced the stone floor in front of her. Now that it was standing by itself, Danzo let go of the sword. But Danzo. Sama. You said, you would show us mercy. And I am. Rise Suza. Suza stood up slowly. Take the sword. Danzo. Sama. Again, Danzo said, take the sword. Suza reached out and took hold of the blade. She clutched the handle and drew the blade from the floor, tears slowly beginning to trickle from her eyes. As he started to leave the chamber, Danzo remarked, the penalty for failure is death. Were it any other time I would have had the 3 of you killed in the most painful ways possible. I would have personally made sure that your suffering would have lasted weeks. But people with skill Suza are difficult to come by. This is your punishment. You will be the one to end your teammates' lives. In Sosa's veins, her blood froze. Her teammates, not her family, were to be killed. She was going to be the one to kill her team, whom she had known since the beginning. Suza said, but, mercy. Because she was at a loss for words. Danzo came to a halt before the door. As a ninja opened the door in front of him, Danzo remarked, I told you I am showing mercy. This way you can assure those 2 get a swift death, which is more than they deserve. Danzo asked without bothering to look around, am I not merciful Suza? Suza didn't respond. As she gazed at her 2 teammates, no, her 2 brothers, who were still bowing, tears streamed down her cheeks. This time, Danzo asked in a louder voice that demanded an answer, am I no merciful? Danzo was the first person Suza had ever hated, however, she was incredibly hated at the moment. She could do nothing, though, she couldn't do anything to Danzo because he owned her. Her head lowered, Suza said, yes Danzo, Sama. As the head left, the ninja shut the door and went back to the shadows of the room. Good, when you finish with those 2 dispose of them. Then return to the barracks until you are needed again, Danzo said. Now sitting cross-legged in front of her, Suza turned to face her brothers. Suza moved slowly behind them because she couldn't bear to look them in the eyes. Her sobs accompanied the blade's screech as it dragged across the floor. She raised the blade slowly while standing behind Ryushi. As he closed his eyes for the final time, Ryushi remarked, at least I'm glad it's you who will end us. At least you will end it quickly. Thank you Suza, goodbye. Kimono also said, closing his eyes, farewell Suza. As she prepared the sword, Sosa's sobs reverberated throughout the room. Choking, Suza said, I'm sorry. She then swung the sword while yelling in agony. She was chilly. She was cold inside, even though her room was warm. Her heart ached with each beat. She had cried so much over the last few days that her eyes were puffy and red. She lay on her side on her bed now, staring at nothing in particular while her lover's backpack held her to her chest. 2 days prior, she had made her way back to the village. She immediately went to her room after being brought home by her sensei. After taking off her rain, soaked clothing, she appeared to be in a trance. After drying herself off, she put on her sleeping clothes, which included a purple pair of silk pajama pants and the matching silk button-up shirt. She did not do anything after that, just lying on her bed. Her meals were brought in by the Hyuga servants, but they were never touched. Hinata would always go to her father when he called, but now she couldn't care less if even God was calling her. She even refused to speak to her father when he called. Tears were starting to form again. They absorbed into the fabric and silently rolled off her face onto her pillow. There was a knock on her door, but she ignored it. All she wanted was to be left to mourn alone. From the other side came a female voice saying, "Hinata, it's me." It was a voice Hinata recognized. Kurenai was the one. Hinata nevertheless decided to say nothing. She heard voices that were muffled. Kurenai was conversing with someone, and she assumed it was her father. She could care less now, though. As she opened the door, Kurenai said, "Hinata, I'm coming in." Kurenai surveyed the space. As usual, everything was tidy. Hinata's bedside table had a tray of cold food on it. She looked over at Hiyashi. "Could you send up a warm meal if you can, Hyuga sama?" Hiyashi gave a rigid nod before turning to walk down the hallway and vanishing around the bend. Kurenai scowled. Hiyashi was never her favorite. Even with his daughter, he was aloof. He would even disparage her for all of her flaws. He would remind Hinata whenever he had the opportunity, and he even made it plain that he preferred his youngest daughter. Kurenai's gaze returned to the young heiress. She walked slowly over to Hinata's bed and took a seat on the side nearest to her. She put a reassuring hand on Hinata's arm and reached out. There was silence when she said, "Hinata." She tried again, "Hinata." Gradually, Hinata lifted her head from the pack and turned to face her sensei. Kurenai turned to face her pupil. She had untidy hair. Her nose was red, and her eyes were puffy and angry red. Hinata questioned her teacher. Why? Kurenai understood her question. Kurenai had spent much of her time considering how to respond to that query. She now hopes that she has given the issue enough thought to be able to assist her student. Hinata. There was nothing that you could do. Hinata felt fresh tears welling up in her eyes as she said, "But," he said T. "That if I circa C. Could tell him T. That someone else loved him he would stay." Kurenai began, "Hinata." But Hinata cut her off. Hinata buried her head in the backpack and sobbed, "I just needed to tell him I loved him. But I couldn't. I could have brought him back." Kurenai kept quiet and allowed Hinata to weep a little while comfortingly massaging her arm. Her sobs gradually subsided. Hinata's tears were running low, Kurenai surmised. Hinata looked up at Kurenai and remarked, I had a dream last night." Kurenai remained silent so Hinata could take her time. "I was in a white place. Nothing around me. Then I saw Naruto-kun. He looked at me with a smile. Then I saw a shadow rise behind him. I tried to warn him but I couldn't move or speak. Then the shadow consumed him. I could hear him cry out in pain but I did nothing. All the pain that he was feeling I could feel it, his pain was my own. Then I wake up." Hinata tightened her grip on the backpack on her torso. Kurenai said, "Hinata, let me tell you a little story." There was a brief pause. "When I was a little girl I found a bird in my backyard. It was hurt, its wing was broken so it could not fly. So brought it in and took care of it. For weeks I took care of it. I loved it like it was a member of my family. But I would always come home and find it looking out the window. I was selfish, I wanted to keep it forever. Then my mother told me something. She told me, if you love something, let it go. If it comes back to you, it's yours forever. If it doesn't, then it was never meant to be. So I let him go and he never came back," chuckled Kurenai. "I know this isn't the most comforting story, but there is a point. And the point is if you love someone or something you can't keep them caged. If you did bring Naruto back, the village would just be a village with no bar. He would be chained to Konoha." Hinata snorted. She reflected that she would have been preventing Naruto from leaving the village. She also failed to consider that the village elders would execute him and treat him like a missing ninja. She would have returned Naruto so he could be put to death. Her stomach turned at the thought. Kurenai said, "Hinata, I want you to tell me the truth." Hinata nodded as she glanced over at Kurenai. Kurenai questioned, "Are you really in love with Naruto?" Since she already knew the answer, Hinata questioned why she would ask her such a question. Hinata remained silent. "Hinata, I need you to answer me. Do you see yourself with anyone else? Can you see yourself marrying anyone else other than Naruto?" She always blushed at the idea of marrying Naruto, and this time was no different. She attempted to visualize herself with other people, but despite her best efforts, only Naruto was able to enter her head. Hinata responded, "No, do you really truly love him?" Hinata said without hesitation, "Yes." Hinata, you did the right thing letting him go. Now all you can do is wait. It may take a while, but if you're patient, Naruto may come back to you, and if he does, then you'll know that he is yours. Hinata paused to reflect. Her teacher was right. She was essentially left with no choice but to wait. Also, you can't just wait for him. Hinata's tear-stained eyes were filled with confusion as she glanced at her teacher. You have to get stronger. If Naruto, know when Naruto does come back, you have to make sure that you are strong enough to hold on to him. Hinata gave her words time to register. In order to prevent someone else from attempting to take him away from her, she needed to strengthen herself. She promised something there. She will ensure that she is strong enough to deserve Naruto's love when he returns. A member of the Hyuga branch entered with a tray of food after knocking on her door. Without a word, she gathered the food that Hinata had not eaten and placed the tray at the foot of her bed before leaving with a bow. Hinata scowled because she detested the way her relatives would treat one another. The cursed seal that afflicted the branch family was something she hoped could be resolved. But according to what she once discovered, only death can take it off of a person's head. Kurenai extended her arm and drew the tray nearer to them. Hinata, you need to eat. I can't promise that the pain you feel will leave anytime soon, but if you want to get stronger, here is the first step, Kurenai stated to her pupil. Hinata sat up slowly after remaining motionless for a moment. She was still holding the backpack to her chest. She grabbed the chopsticks and held them in her hand correctly. She reached over and used her sticks to pick up some rice. She chewed the rice slowly after placing it in her mouth. Her stomach growled a little and she gradually realized how hungry she was. Kurenai grinned while observing Hinata as she slowly consumed her meal while blushing in embarrassment. Kurenai told Hinata, "Well, it's a start." Hinata just kept eating without saying anything. "Naruto, I promise that I will become stronger, and when I do find you, I hope that I can convince you return to the village. And me. I'll do everything that I can. I won't give up, because that is my way of the ninja." At about the same time, the wasteland Naruto had the impression that he was floating. All Naruto could see was darkness. Naruto attempted to move but was unable to do so. After he passed out, Naruto pondered what had happened to him. Was he no longer alive? Naruto was unable to tell. Naruto pondered, perhaps this is what happens when you die. Naruto simply stayed in the shadows, unable to determine how long he had been there when he began to hear voices. A voice that sounded like an elderly man asked, "What can you tell me? Has there been any changes?" Another voice, which sounded like a man but much younger, said, "Well, sir, his tenant decided to finally aid in his healing. I guess he saw that his jailer wasn't going to perish anytime soon." Naruto wondered, they know about the Kyuubi? How? His wounds have healed, and the poison has been removed from his system, but there will be a scar on his arm. Lucky him. The younger speaker laughed. The older voice asked the younger one, "How long before he wakes up? I would like to begin the work on his seal." Naruto assumed that the younger voice was pondering during the brief silence. "To tell you the truth, I'm not sure, Shikyokage-sama," the young voice said. Then Naruto became aware of the lightening of the surrounding darkness, lighter and lighter until he nearly lost his vision. "Sir, it looks like he is finally coming to." Slowly, deep blue eyes opened. He struggled with the brightness of the lights shining at him, opening and closing his eyes. His eyes took a moment to adjust. They were white and he was staring at the ceiling. To his right, he heard a slight beeping sound. Since he had woken up to that sound numerous times, he assumed it was a heart monitor. He turned to see a window to his right, but the view was obscured by the drawn curtains. There was a chair by the window, and someone was sitting in it. His other leg touched the floor, while the other was draped over one of the chair's arms. His head was on the arm of the other chair, his blonde hair was hanging off the side, his right arm was drooling and touching the floor, his other arm was resting on his stomach, and he was snoozing lightly while drooling. The voices confronted Naruto as he turned his head. Beside a younger man was an elderly man dressed in what appeared to be a black version of the Hokage robes the third would don. The younger man was dressed in a gray shirt, black standard shinobi pants, and a white doctor's coat. The man's short brown hair was incredibly disheveled, as if he had just woken up from a long nap, and his brown eyes were fixed on his glasses. However, what most attracted Naruto's attention were what appeared to be horns emerging from the man's head. Each of the two horns was only about 1.5 inches in length. One of two thoughts crossed Naruto's mind. He is hallucinating as a result of his injuries. He was in hell, or two. Even though his muscles protested, Naruto attempted to sit up. The elderly man approached the bedside, laid one of his large hands across Naruto's chest, and gave him a gentle shove back down. The old man's soothing voice said, "Calm down, young one. There is no need to push yourself right now. No one will hurt you here, you are safe." Naruto became a little more at ease. In an attempt to moisten his throat and speak, Naruto swallowed several times. When the Shikyokage saw it, he reached for the small table with the cup and jug of water. After filling the cup with water, he lifted Naruto's head to let him drink. He eagerly drained the cup of its contents as soon as the water touched his lips. Before Naruto decided he had had enough, the Shikyokage filled the cup a couple more times. Naruto was certain that was the best cup of water he had ever had after spending so much time in the wasteland. Naruto was able to speak after a few moments. With his voice still getting used to being used again, Naruto questioned, "Where? A.am. I." As he walked around the bed to check on the Naruto monitoring equipment, the doctor said, "You are in the hospital. You gave us a scare a few times when you first came in, ya know." "What?" inquired Naruto. As he began to write on a chart, the doctor explained, "Your heart stopped a few times. So technically you died a few times." After a brief pause, Naruto resumed his conversation. With his eyes back on the ceiling, Naruto questioned, "Why didn't you let me just die?" Midway through the letter, the doctor stopped writing. He turned to face his leader, his expression indicating that he was at a loss for words. The Shikyokage was not perplexed. Rather, he was saddened that Naruto had come to terms with death, and he was angry that it had escaped him. The Shikyokage remarked, "Because you weren't ready for death." "Yes, I was. I had accepted it. I was ready to die." The Shikyokage's voice was firm as he said, "Look at me, little fox." Shikyokage extended his hand and prodded Naruto's head as he turned to face the village. The Shikyokage withdrew his hand and prodded Naruto's chest, just above his heart, saying, "You may have accepted death here." The Shikyokage took his hand away from Naruto and put it back at his side, saying, "But here you refused to die. Those times your heart stopped, you came back because you simply refused to die. You have a strong heart, you are a fighter, even though you were practically in death's clutches." This man, this stranger, spoke to Naruto as though his death would be painful, but Naruto stayed silent. Similar to how a parent would talk to their child after the child misbehaved. Naruto was filled with shame. He started to apologize, but the Shikyokage silenced him with a raised hand. "There is no need to say anything more. I know you have questions, but they can wait till morning. Right now you need to rest. Your wounds are healed, so I can show you where you are and answer all the quests you may have." Naruto nodded his head slowly. After completing his inspection of everything that needed his attention, the doctor left the room and wished Naruto and his leader a good night. The Shikyokage also turned to go. He came to a halt at the doorway. "Don't worry, you'll be fine. Good night." Naruto observed him shutting the door and turning down the lights on a switch. Naruto stayed up a long time. He was becoming affected by the room's darkness, and soon he noticed that his eyes were growing heavy. Naruto heard something coming from the window just as he was about to nod off. "It was just the person on the chair," he said, turning around. He was there, but he had forgotten it. As he moved on the chair, the blonde muttered, I swear it wasn't me, Naruto could just make out a frown on his face in the dim light, suggesting that he was having a bad dream. The teenager who was sleeping muttered, Ow damn. Yuga, I think I'm bleeding." Naruto watched him lift the arm on his stomach, rub his head, and then put it back. "Yup. I'm bleeding." Naruto gave the other blonde's antics a small laugh. After that, he shut his eyes and waited for sleep to take him. However, a sharp pain in his chest flared up before he could get any sleep. He gripped his chest instinctively, just above his heart. His eyes welled up with tears. The ache became a dull throb. Tears streamed down his face. Naruto used his other hand to wipe his eyes. He gazed bewilderedly at his tears. He had been informed by the Shikyokage that his wounds had healed. They might have missed something. The throb subsided until it disappeared. Naruto did not move. What was all that about? Is there an injury that they missed? And, why'd I feel so empty? Naruto remained motionless. As he attempted to make sense of the situation, tears kept streaming down his face. He made an effort to ignore this emptiness inside of him. It was challenging, but eventually he was able to stop crying. He closed his eyes and attempted to fall asleep after he had finally calmed down, wishing that his sleep would not be marred by the terrible sense of emptiness. From his position at the end of the council meeting table, Danzo declared, "It is now time to vote." From the shinobi side of the table, Inoichi Yamanaka remarked, "Danzo, what you are attempting is not justified." Shikaku Nara answered, "I agree, the Hokage should be present if you want to do this." Danzo looked around the room, examining each and every member of the council. In order to decide the Naruto situation, he had called this meeting. Naturally, he didn't tell the Hokage and didn't do anything to stop this from happening. Calmly, Danzo stated, the Hokage's presence is not necessary. Shikaku retorted in an equally composed tone, given what you are suggesting, the Hokage's presence is absolutely necessary. Danzo's expression was emotionless as he gazed at the leader of the Nara clan. Nara-san, as you know, the Hokage is not always needed when making these kinds of decisions, and also, right now, as I'm sure all of you know, the Hokage is not in any condition to lead right now. Be glad that this meeting is not about her questionable leadership and less than tolerable attitude. Shikaku did not respond. Even though he didn't like the circumstances, he didn't want Danzo to call in and cast doubt on the current Hokage's leadership. Even though he detested the circumstance, Danzo knew that he should now keep his mouth shut. He would undoubtedly say that he would be a better leader. In an attempt to console his friend, Inoichi put a hand on his shoulder. Shikaku simply said nothing. The head of the Hyuga clan said calmly, well, can we continue this meeting? I for one wish to return home. Around the table, there were murmurs of agreement. Danzo stood up and remarked, very well, without any further interruptions, let us vote now. Now all in favor? Inquired Danzo. The hands went up on the civilian side of the council table. Danzo would be grinning right now if he ever displayed any emotion. The members of the civilian council were very susceptible to manipulation. He could get them to agree to everything with a few shrewd remarks, assurances, and threats when needed. When Danzo turned to face the shinobi, he was delighted to see two of them holding up their hands. Shibi! Inoichi exclaimed, startled. The typically silent bug user clarified, my vote is unbiased, and based on the evidence presented. I'm sure that if it were any other person, you would be raising your hand as well. The other individual who held his hand was Homura Mitokado. Kaharu Utatane was able to keep the village and the council together after the third Hokage passed away. While Kaharu was in charge of the civilian side of the council, Homura was, one could argue, in charge of the shinobi side. Now all opposed? Danzo asked, despite the fact that it was totally superfluous. Sume Inuzuka, Shikaku, Inoichi, and the unexpected Hiyashi also performed. A resounding loss for them. Danzo got up from his chair slowly. So it is decided. From this day Naruto Uzumaki is now a Rouge Ninja. In his hospital bed, Naruto was sitting upright. He had just woken up a short while ago. Naruto turned to face the window, where sunlight was visible through the curtain's sides. When he woke up, the blonde who had been dozing off in the window chair was gone, leaving Naruto alone in his hospital room. Gazing at his bandaged hands, Naruto thought, I wonder where I am. Naruto was startled out of his reverie by a voice saying, that's a good question, Kit. Naruto furrowed his brow. Ever since he had ventured into the wasteland, he had not heard from the fox. And the last person or demon he wanted to talk to at the moment was the prisoner inside of him. To the disgust of his jailer, Kyuubi laughed and said, the silent treatment, huh? What did I do to deserve that? Naruto said nothing. Considering everything that had transpired in his life, he could have retaliated against the Kyuubi. However, he kept his mouth shut because he knew that if he showed any interest, the king of the Bijus would win. As Naruto kept ignoring the monster, silence descended. You can't ignore me forever, Kit. Whether you like it or not, sooner or later you and I are going to have a proper talk. But for now, watch yourself. There is something about these people, Kyuubi stated to Naruto. Naruto was drawn to the Kyuubi's final remark, but before he could inquire what he meant, his room door opened and the elderly man and doctor from the previous evening entered. Naruto realized that this time he was not having hallucinations. The horns on his head were visible to him. They were accompanied by another individual. She wore a coat that was similar to the horned doctor's, but instead of the male doctor's coat being open, hers was fully buttoned up, and her black hair was pulled back into a tidy bun. As she approached Naruto's bedside, she exuded professionalism. So you're the new one? The women asked Naruto. Naruto remained silent. He was too preoccupied to look at her face. Although she was extremely attractive, he wasn't drawn to her beauty. It was her face and eyes, or rather, the features of her face. In addition to being slitted, her eyes were yellow, and there was something around the bones of her cheeks. There were scales covering the area of Naruto's cheekbones, if she wasn't seeing things. In contrast to the rest of her peach-colored skin, the scales were somewhat light grayish in color. The female physician gave Naruto a perplexed look. Was there something about her face that the child was interested in? The woman felt around her face and said, what? Is there something on my face? Naruto observed the woman rubbing her face with her fingers. She ran her fingers over the scales, but Naruto did nothing but watch. Could she not see that she had scales on her face? That baffled him. Naruto therefore reasoned that he ought to assist her by pointing them out. You. Got scales under your eyes. The woman paused, gazing at Naruto. So, she inquired. Naruto was more perplexed now. It sounded as though she was aware of the scales on her face. At this point, the elderly man from the night before made the decision to step in. The Shikyokage told the dark-haired doctor, so it is as you said, Ayane-san, he is new. The yellow-eyed medical expert's face lit up with realization. He would be perplexed by the scales on her face, of course. However, he shouldn't be that perplexed. Things like appearance shouldn't be all that confusing if he was a ninja. Ayane took a tiny flashlight out of the breast pocket of her coat and started examining him, saying, well, that aside, let's see if you're ready to leave. After examining for roughly 10 minutes, Ayane turned to face her boss and co-worker. She gave Naruto a gentle tap on the head and said, well, he looks as healthy as can be. I say he can leave whenever he is ready. She then left, leaving Naruto and the elderly man alone as the horned doctor trailed behind her. Naruto is approached by the Shikyokage, who places a package on his bed. The Shikyokage said to Naruto, change into these and we can leave, then I will answer your questions, but I want to know something first. As he waited for the question, Naruto glanced at the Shikyokage. He hoped that the reason he was wandering the wasteland had nothing to do with him personally. I would like to know your name. A straightforward query. Naruto surmised that he would have likely asked the same question if their roles had been reversed. Naruto replied, my name is Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki. The Shikyokage's eyes grew a little wider. Uzumaki? Then that means that. Naruto cleared his throat, interrupting the Shikyokage's thought. As Naruto left the room to wait, the Shikyokage said, well, when you finish dressing yourself we can leave. I shall be waiting outside. Naruto glanced at his bed and the bundle. A pair of shinobi sandals and some clothing were inside when he opened it. After setting the clothes aside, Naruto got out of bed. Naruto found it a little hard to stand on the cold ground. He must have been unconscious for a while because his legs felt a little weak. After a few minutes, his strength started to return, allowing him to stand up and start taking off the bandages. He had one on his torso, right forearm, left bicep, both hands, and head. He takes them out one by one. He was shocked to see what was underneath his bicep when he took off the bandage. He had a scar on his arm. Scars were quite common in his line of work, as one might expect. However, Naruto discovered early on that he never developed any scars other than emotional ones. Compared to the rest of his skin, the scar on his arm is lighter in color. It went from one side to the other around his bicep. According to Naruto, the doctors were able to sufficiently seal the wound to prevent the scar from being as large as it could have been. At its thickest, the scar measured roughly 5 centimeters. As he took off the hospital gown and the bandage covering his torso, Naruto made the decision to think about his scar later. He put on the clothes the Shikyokage had given him after taking off the bandages. He was wearing a simple white shirt and matching white shorts that were slightly longer than his knees. After putting on the sandals, he opened his room door. Standing patiently outside his door was the Shikyokage. With hesitation, Naruto left the room, his gaze flitting around the room. The hallway was white and spotless, just like any other hospital hallway. As he inhaled, a familiar sterile smell emerged. That smell always bothered him. He was startled out of his reverie by the Shikyokage's voice asking, "Are you ready to go?" In response, Naruto said, "Why?" "Yeah." He started down the hall, saying, "Then let us take our leave." Naruto chose to stay close and followed. He was still unsure of his location. At that moment, he became aware of the presence of several other individuals in the hallway. Naruto realized that he was no longer seeing things as they passed them. A man reading a chart stood to his right. The teeth that stuck out of his mouth were what made him stand out. A woman was pushing a cart of medical supplies farther down the hall, and it appeared that another cart was following her from behind. She greeted them as they passed and initially appeared normal. At that moment, he saw what appeared to be a tail pulling the cart behind her. He stopped when he noticed the tail. She pulled the cart to wherever she was going while the tail was wrapped around the handle. Until now, Naruto had only ever seen tails on animals. The Shikyokage warned Naruto, "You should not stare so much. You might make someone feel self-conscious." Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and said, "Sorry, I just, never seen a tail on a person before." The blonde made the Shikyokage laugh. "There is nothing to apologize for, but don't think you should really be surprised. You are a ninja, correct?" With a hint of sadness, Naruto replied, "Well, kinda." Choosing not to pursue the issue, the Shikyokage gestured for them to go on. As Naruto explored the remainder of the hospital, he noticed a few more oddities. More tails, some different from others, and ears, not just regular ears, were visible to him. Some of the ears were pointed, while others resembled the ears of animals or cats. Naruto begins to experience some embarrassment. As a ninja, he had witnessed some oddities. Among them was a man with a lot of arms. 6 arms. Additionally, he became perplexed by things like ears and tails. They walked for a few more minutes until they arrived at the hospital's entrance exit. While escorting Naruto out of the hospital, the Shikyoge said, "Now then, allow me to be the first to welcome you to Araninoir." The weather was the first thing Naruto noticed. Surprisingly, the temperature was not as hot as the wasteland should have been. Rather, it felt like it was approaching the high 90s. As if he had never set foot in a desert. In contrast to the intense heat he experienced while traversing the open wasteland, it felt like heaven. Naruto questioned, "Is this still the wasteland?" The elderly man started to walk again and said, "Yes." "Then why isn't it as hot as it is out there?" With a slight smile, the Shikyoge replied, "That young one is a village secret." The Shikyoge led into the village streets from the hospital compound. As he followed, Naruto scanned the area, taking in every sight. With all the various buildings lining the streets, it brought to mind Konoha. People from all over the village were out on the streets. Naruto observed the numerous people moving up and down the street. Naruto observed that many of the village's residents exhibited animalistic tendencies, and that many animals were present to accompany the humans. He observed wolves strolling alongside their masters, snakes encircling humans, and a variety of birds perched on people's shoulders. Naruto also noticed a number of kids playing. Some of the kids were laughing while riding on top of the animals while their parents tried to keep them under control. Naruto looked up as he saw a shadow move across the floor. A number of people were moving about on the rooftops. It had a nearly identical appearance to what one might expect from a ninja village. Naruto then heard a sound. It had the sound of a sniff. Not the kind that a weeping person would hear. However, if someone or something was smelling something, the kind person would hear. Naruto cast his gaze downward. A child who was no older than 5 was present. Like an animal sniffing its new environment, he was sniffing Naruto. On top of his head, Naruto noticed that he had 2 black, pointed ears that matched the rest of his hair. A small gray fox was sniffing Naruto next to the young boy. Just as Naruto was about to ask the young boy a question, the child looked up and grinned at him. The boy was light-skinned, with blue eyes and small fangs. The young child said to Naruto, "You smell like me, Aniki." The child stooped to pick up the fox. The young boy held up his fox in front of Naruto and said, "Say hi Kiki." Naruto was unsure of how to react. He was suddenly referred to as brother by this young child. He wasn't used to being approached by strangers and referred to as a brother. At the fox in front of him, Naruto simply began. The black eyes of the fox stared back. Unsure of what to do, Naruto finally said, hi." A voice behind the boy said, "Zeri, there you are." The young boy turned around and exclaimed, "Oh." Naruto turned to face the newcomer. Naruto surmised that the woman was the boy's mother. Everything was black, including her black kimono. Her hair was as black as the child's, her skin was peach, and she had 2 ears on top of her head that occasionally twitched. She had lovely green eyes, which were fixed on the mischievous child. Her cheeks were also marked with whiskers, but there was only 1 line on each side of her face. With her hand on her hips, the mother asked her son, "What have I told you about running off?" As the young boy attempted to clarify, the fox looked up at him and appeared to be glaring at him in anger that Kiki was being blamed. But Oka-san, it was Kiki's fault. She said she found our new Aniki. The woman gave Naruto a look. The woman leaned down and picked up the young boy, saying, "I'm sorry about my son. He was just really curious when we smelled a new scent in the village." According to Naruto, "It's okay. My name is Hitomi. I'm Naruto." As she said goodbye to them, Hitomi said, "Nice to meet you, Naruto. I'm sorry, but I have to go. This little guy had an appointment with a doctor." "Goodbye Naruto-san, Shokage-sama." As he and his mother headed in the direction Naruto had just come from, Zeri yelled, "Bye Aniki." A tiny smile appeared on Naruto's face as he waved it back. "Come now Naruto, let us continue. There is still much to see." They kept stopping when more people greeted him, and Naruto nodded. For once, he didn't feel the need to constantly check over his shoulder because everyone here was friendly. It was still raining. The rain kept coming down. A decent amount, but not as bad as previously. The person who was out in his team's training field, however, was unfazed by the rain. Despite the rain, the majority of ninja teams persisted in their training, but more than an hour ago, his team's training session came to an end. However, that did not deter him from using open palm strikes to hit the boulder in front of him. He was striking the rock so hard and for such a long time that there were multiple cracks that webbed out from the spot. Ever since he found out that Naruto had left the village, he had always done that before and after practice. He hit once more. He cared, even though he could feel the blood on his hands from the cuts that now graced them. He was upset, enraged even. He ought to have known better than to trust what someone like him said. He was a cunning prankster. And he truly did believe the honeyed words of this slight of mouth con artist. In fact, he had changed. He was informed by his team that he had changed. He now realizes that his transformation was predicated on deception. He foolishly believed Naruto when he claimed to be able to change the Hyuga. He hit again, and this time he didn't care whether it was his hand or the boulder that made the cracking sound, but he kept hitting. She observed him from beneath a canopy, watched as he collided with the earth. She was hurt to see him in this state. He was the team's main source of support. You could always rely on him to be unaffected by anything. Her strength is a living example of strength. He now had a broken appearance and was resolved to keep going until he was exhausted. Unsure of what to do when she got to him, she approached him slowly. She was close to him before she could think of anything. He either didn't care or didn't know she was there because he didn't acknowledge her. She tried again after closing her mouth after opening it to say something. Neji. You need to stop pushing yourself so hard, and if you don't get out of the rain you'll get sick. Neji kept hitting the rock, seemingly ignoring her. Neji. In between blows, Neji finally uttered, I was a fool. Neji. Like a fool. I believed him, thinking that he could change the Hyuga. Neji went on. Uncertain of how to react, Tenten bit her lip. She was the only person to whom Neji explained the reason for his attitude shift when she first noticed it. He promised that he would change the Hyuga. I don't know how, but I want to be there when he does it. He informed her of this. With Naruto no longer around, Neji was gradually reverting to his icy former self. She saw Neji flinch for a moment before he resumed his striking after hearing a crack. He had to be stopped by her. Her hand touched his shoulder. The intended outcome of the action was not achieved. Neji turned, seized her, and nearly knocked the air out of her umbrella as she slammed her against the rock. Tenten called out to him, Neji? With his head down, Neji had her pinned against the rock by her wrists. Neji said to her, I'm scared, Tenten. Tenten was taken aback. Neji was alarmed. Even if Neji were afraid, he would never acknowledge it. Tenten said nothing. Neji told her, I don't know what to do anymore. Now she got it. Neji was to assist Naruto in transforming the Hyuga. What he couldn't do, Naruto was going to do. Now that he was gone, he felt as though the family had lost their one chance to change. Tenten's hands wriggled slowly out of Neji's hold. Neji simply dropped his arms to his sides. Tenten put her hands boldly on either side of his face and raised his head so that he was staring at her. Pale lavender eyes met brown ones. She then moved slowly forward and gave him a gentle kiss on the lips. A simple, innocent touch with a profound meaning. As she moved to put her hands around him and give him a hug, Neji gave her a startled look. She whispered to him, loud enough for him to hear over the rain, You don't have to be scared, Neji. I'm here for you. You are my strength. Now let me be yours.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.